A failed mail-order bride stands alone in a hostile frontier town, clutching a wedding dress for a dead man she never met. Penniless and humiliated, Elena Mercer faces a choice: beg for mercy or walk into the wilderness to die. But when she arrives at the most feared ranch in Texas and locks eyes with a wild black stallion that has killed before, something impossible happens. The beast goes still. In that moment, the brutal rancher Caleb Boone realizes this strange woman might be more dangerous than any horse he's ever tried to break. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside Black Hollow in a cloud of dust so thick Elena could taste dirt between her teeth. She stepped down onto the wooden platform, legs shaking from 3 days of being thrown around inside that rattling box, and immediately felt every eye in town turn toward her cream-colored dress. It was supposed to be a wedding dress. Now it just made her look like a fool. "That her?" someone muttered from the general store porch. "Poor thing, don't even know yet," another voice answered. Elena's fingers tightened around the single carpet bag that held everything she owned. The dress had cost her 2 months of wages back in St. Louis, stitched by hand in the dim light after 14-hour shifts at the textile mill. She'd imagined stepping off this coach into the arms of James Whitmore, the rancher whose letters had promised her a new life, a home, respect. Instead, the station manager, a thin man with tobacco-stained teeth, approached her with the kind of expression people wore at funerals. "Miss Mercer?" "Yes." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm real sorry to tell you this, but Mr. Whitmore passed 4 days ago. Heart gave out while he was mending fence." The words hit her like cold water. Elena stood there, watching his mouth move through explanations she barely heard. Something about the funeral already being done, his property going to a cousin in Oklahoma, no provisions made for her. What am I supposed to do? The question escaped before she could stop it. The station manager shifted his weight, wouldn't meet her eyes. "Well, that ain't really my concern, miss. You might try the boarding house, but Mrs. Hendricks don't extend credit." He walked away. Just like that. Left her standing on the platform while the stagecoach driver tossed down her trunk with a thud that rattled her bones. Elena looked down the main street of Black Hollow. Wooden buildings leaned against each other like drunk men. The saloon door hung crooked on its hinges. A dog with visible ribs limped past, and somewhere close by, a woman's sharp laughter cut through the afternoon heat before ending abruptly, like someone had slapped it quiet. This was the town James Whitmore had described as growing and full of opportunity. She picked up her trunk, lighter than it should have been, containing only 2 other dresses, a Bible her mother had pressed into her hands, and the packet of letters that had convinced her to leave everything behind, and started walking toward the boarding house. The Hendricks place sat at the end of the street, a 2-story structure that might have been painted white once, but now showed more bare wood than anything else. Elena climbed the steps and knocked. The woman who answered had gray hair pulled so tight it seemed to stretch her face backward. Her eyes traveled over Elena's dress with cold assessment. "You're the mail-order bride. I'm Elena Mercer, and I know who you are. Whole town knows. James Whitmore's intended, except he's dead now, and you're standing on my porch looking for charity." Heat rushed to Elena's face. "I can pay. I have some money saved, and I can work $3 a week for a room. First week in advance. Meals are extra." Elena's stomach dropped. She had $8 to her name, maybe enough for 2 weeks if she didn't eat much. After that, "I'll take it," she said, because what choice did she have? Mrs. Hendricks held out her hand. Elena counted out 3 silver dollars, watching them disappear into the woman's apron pocket. The room was smaller than the storage closet at the textile mill. A narrow bed, a washstand with a cracked basin, and a window that looked out at the alley where someone had dumped a pile of rotting vegetables. The smell made Elena's eyes water. She sat on the bed, the mattress was thin enough that she could feel the rope webbing underneath, and stared at her hands. They were rough from factory work, the nails cut short, 2 fingers still scarred from where she'd gotten careless with a cutting blade last winter. These weren't the hands of a lady. They were the hands of someone who'd spent her whole life scraping by, and who'd been stupid enough to think a stranger's letters could change that. Elena pulled out the packet and read through them again, even though she'd memorized every line during the long journey west. James Whitmore had nice handwriting. He'd described his ranch as modest but profitable, his life as simple but comfortable. He'd said he wanted a partner, not a servant. He'd said she'd be valued. She'd believed him because she'd wanted to, because working 16 hours a day in a factory that turned women into ghosts had made her desperate enough to gamble on a man she'd never met. Now that man was dead, and she was trapped in a town that looked at her like something that had washed up in a flood. Elena folded the letters and shoved them back in her trunk. Self-pity wouldn't pay for next week's room. She needed work. The next morning, she put on her plainest dress, brown cotton, worn at the elbows, and started asking. The general store didn't need help. The saloon owner laughed in her face when she walked in, said she didn't have the look for that kind of work, and anyway, he had all the girls he needed. The blacksmith just grunted and turned back to his forge without answering. By noon, Elena had walked the entire main street twice. No one would hire her. Most wouldn't even listen to her full request. She sat on a bench outside the dry goods store, watching wagons roll past, and tried to think. $8 wouldn't last. The boarding house would throw her out. And then what? She'd seen women sleeping in doorways in St. Louis, selling their bodies or their souls, or whatever was left after everything else got taken. She'd sworn she'd never become that desperate. But desperation had a way of sneaking up on you. You Elena Mercer? She looked up. A man stood in front of her, young, maybe 19, with dark hair and a nervous way of holding his hat. Yes. Heard you was looking for work. Hope fluttered in her chest. I am. I can clean, cook, sew. Ain't that kind of work. He glanced around like he was worried someone might see him talking to her. But there's a ranch about 6 miles out that always needs hands for the hard jobs. They ain't particular about who does them, long as the work gets done. What ranch? His expression shifted, something almost like pity crossing his face. Ryder Boone Ranch. It's the biggest spread in the territory, but it's also... He paused, searching for words. It's a hard place. They say the owner, Caleb Boone, buried his wife 5 years back, and something in him died with her. He runs that ranch like a man who don't care about nothing except keeping busy enough not to think. Will he hire me? Maybe, if you can handle it. But I'm telling you, miss, most men don't last more than a season out there. It's brutal work. And Boone's foreman, Duke Harlan, is meaner than a rattlesnake. They go through workers like other ranches go through horseshoes. Elena stood up. How do I get there? The young man looked at her for a long moment, like he was trying to decide if he should talk her out of it. Finally, he sighed. Follow the main road west out of town. When you see the fence line with the burned posts, that's Boone land. Keep going till you hit the main house. Can't miss it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said, and walked away before she could ask his name. Elena went back to her room, changed into her sturdiest boots, and started walking. The 6 miles felt like 20. The sun beat down without mercy, and the road was rough enough that she had to watch every step to avoid turning an ankle. Twice she had to step off into the brush to let wagons pass, and both times the driver stared at her like she was crazy for being out here alone on foot. Maybe she was crazy, but crazy was better than helpless. When she finally saw the burned fence posts, relief rushed through her so strong it made her dizzy. The Ryder Boone Ranch spread out before her in every direction, land that rolled away toward distant hills, grass that looked yellow in the heat, and somewhere far off, the dark shapes of cattle grazing. The main house sat at the end of a long drive. It was bigger than Elena had expected, 2 stories of weathered wood with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The barn behind it was massive, and she could see several other outbuildings scattered around the property. Men were working near the corral. She could hear their voices, rough and loud, and the sound of something heavy being dragged across dirt. Elena straightened her shoulders, smoothed down her dress, and walked toward them. She was halfway across the yard when the screaming started. Not human screaming, animal, a horse, making a sound so full of rage and terror that it stopped her in her tracks. Hold that rope, damn it! I'm trying. He's gonna... A wooden fence rail cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Men shouted, scattered. Elena saw something black and massive rear up inside the corral, front hooves striking air. It was a stallion, the biggest horse she'd ever seen, black as midnight, with wild eyes that caught the sunlight and threw it back like broken glass. 3 men had ropes on him, trying to pull him toward the barn, but the horse was having none of it. He reared again, jerking one of the men clean off his feet. The man hit the ground hard and didn't get up. Shoot the damn thing, someone yelled. Not yet, another voice, deeper, with authority behind it. Get him in the barn before he kills somebody. Elena moved closer without thinking, drawn by something she couldn't name. The stallion's coat was slick with sweat, foam dripping from his mouth. His ears were pinned flat against his skull, and when he screamed again, the sound went straight through her bones. But underneath all that rage, she saw something else. The way he kept trying to move toward the back corner of the corral. The way his eyes weren't just wild, they were terrified. Somebody get a gun. That was a different man, older, with a face like carved granite and a voice used to being obeyed. He wore a leather vest and a hat pulled low, and when he stepped toward the corral with a rifle, Elena's body moved before her brain caught up. Wait! Every head turned toward her. The men holding the ropes, the man on the ground groaning and clutching his ribs, the one with the rifle. Elena walked up to the corral fence. Up close, the stallion was even more massive, probably 16 hands of pure muscle and fury. He'd gone still now, watching her with those wild eyes, nostrils flaring. What the hell are you doing? The man with the rifle, the foreman, she guessed from the way the others deferred to him, stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Get away from there before He's scared. Elena kept her voice low, steady, not talking to the men, talking to the horse. Look at his eyes. He's not mean. He's terrified. Lady, I don't know who you are, but that animal's killed before and he'll kill again if we give him the chance. The foreman's finger rested on the trigger guard. Now step back. Has anyone tried just leaving him alone? What? Elena gestured at the ropes, the men surrounding the corral, the rifle. You're all crowding him, pulling on him, shouting. Look at him. He's cornered. What would you do if you were cornered? The foreman's face darkened. I said step back. This ain't your concern. Duke! The new voice came from behind her, quiet, but carrying enough weight that everyone went silent. Lower the rifle. Elena turned and found herself looking at a man who seemed carved from the same hard stone as the land itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 35, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples, and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wore work clothes, flannel shirt, worn denim, boots covered in dust. But there was something in the way he stood that marked him as someone used to being in charge. This had to be Caleb Boone. He walked past her without acknowledgement, stopped at the corral fence, and studied the stallion with an expression Elena couldn't read. How long's he been like this? 2 hours, boss. Duke Harlan, the foreman, lowered the rifle but didn't put it away. Won't let nobody near him. Nearly took Cody's head off when he tried to check that foreleg. Boone was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Everyone back off. Give him space. Boss, that horse is dangerous. I didn't ask your opinion, Duke. I said back off. The men moved away from the corral, slow and resentful. The ones holding ropes let them go slack. The stallion's ears flicked forward slightly, but he didn't move. Boone turned to Elena. Who are you? Elena Mercer. I came to ask about work. His eyes traveled over her, taking in the worn dress, the dusty boots, the way she stood too close to a horse that had just put a man on the ground. You got any experience with ranching? No. Then why are you here? Elena met his stare. Because I don't have anywhere else to go, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Something flickered across his face. Maybe surprise, maybe interest, maybe nothing at all. Hard to tell with a man who looked like he'd forgotten how to show emotion years ago. You really think that horse is scared? He asked. Yes. Why? She looked back at the stallion. He'd moved now, shifting toward the corner he'd been trying to reach earlier, where a wooden water trough sat in shadow. Because scared things fight. When you're cornered and everyone's bigger than you and nobody's listening, fighting's all you have left. The silence that followed felt heavy. Elena realized what she'd said, how much of herself she'd just revealed to a stranger, and felt heat creep up her neck. Boone studied her for another moment. Then he turned to Duke. Give her a job. Duke's face went red. Boss, you can't be serious. She's a woman. She ain't got no experience, and she just wandered in here like... I don't recall asking you to debate it. Give her a job, put her on stable work, cleaning, whatever needs doing, standard wages. This is a mistake. Boone's expression didn't change, but something in his voice went cold. Are you refusing? Duke's jaw worked like he was chewing rocks. No, boss. Good. Boone looked at Elena. You'll bunk in the small cabin behind the cookhouse. Meals are at dawn, noon, and dusk. Miss any of them, you don't eat. Work starts at sunup. You try to leave before the first month's done, you forfeit your wages. Understood? Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Boone walked away without another word, headed toward the main house with the kind of stride that said he had more important things to think about than one more desperate worker on his ranch. Duke Harlan stepped close to Elena, close enough that she could smell tobacco and old sweat. His voice dropped to something just above a whisper. I don't know what you think you're doing here, but let me make this real clear. You ain't wanted, you ain't needed, and the only reason you got that job is because the boss has a soft spot for strays. He leaned closer. But soft spots don't last. You mess up once, you're gone, and I'll be watching for that mess up real careful. He walked away, taking the rifle with him. Elena stood alone in the yard, watching the black stallion finally lower his head to drink from the trough in the corner. The horse's sides heaved with exhaustion, and there were rope burns visible on his neck where the men had been pulling. She'd gotten what she came for. A job, wages, a place to sleep that wasn't Mrs. Hendrick's coffin of a room. But standing there in the brutal heat with Duke Harlan's threat still hanging in the air and Caleb Boone's cold eyes burned into her memory, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just walked into something far more dangerous than being stranded in Black Hollow. The stallion raised his head and looked at her. For just a second, their eyes met. Then he turned away, and Elena went to find her cabin. The cabin wasn't much. 4 walls, a narrow bed, a chair with one leg shorter than the others, and a window that didn't quite close. But it was hers, at least for now. And it didn't smell like rotting vegetables. She dropped her carpet bag on the bed and sat down, letting the reality of the day catch up with her all at once. Her feet ached, her mouth was dry, and somewhere deep in her chest, fear and relief were tangled together so tight she couldn't separate them. A knock on the door made her jump. "Miss Mercer?" A woman's voice, older, with a Mexican accent. "I'm Carmen. I run the cookhouse. Boss said to bring you some supper." Elena opened the door. The woman standing there was maybe 60, gray hair in a braid, with kind eyes, and hands that looked like they'd worked every day of her life. "Thank you," Elena said, taking the plate Carmen offered. Beans, cornbread, and a piece of salt pork that was probably tough as leather but smelled like heaven anyway. "You eat. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be hard." Carmen started to leave, then paused. "You really think that black horse is scared?" "Yes." Carmen nodded slowly. "I've been here 15 years. That horse came in 3 months ago, wild off the range. Nobody can touch him. Boss paid good money for him, thinking he could be broke, but..." She shook her head. "Some things too wild to tame. But maybe you're right. Maybe scared and wild ain't so different." She left before Elena could respond. Elena ate the food standing up, too tired to care about manners, and washed it down with water from the pitcher someone had left on the chair. Then she lay down on the bed without bothering to undress and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the stallion's eyes, about Duke Harlan's threat, about Caleb Boone's expression when she'd said that scared things fight. Tomorrow she'd start work she didn't know how to do, surrounded by men who didn't want her there, on a ranch run by a man who looked like he'd turned his heart to stone on purpose. But she'd survived the textile mill. She'd survived losing her parents to cholera. She'd survived 3 days in a stagecoach and arriving in a hostile town with $8 and a wedding dress for a dead stranger. She could survive this. Elena closed her eyes and slept. Dawn came early and loud. Someone, she later learned it was Carmen's grandson Miguel, banged on her door at what had to be 5 in the morning, shouting that breakfast was in 15 minutes and latecomers didn't eat. Elena dragged herself out of bed, splashed water on her face, and stumbled toward the cookhouse in the blue pre-dawn light. The building was bigger than she'd expected, with long tables where maybe 20 men were already eating. They all stopped talking when she walked in. Just stopped, mid-sentence, and stared at her like she was a 2-headed calf. Elena kept her chin up and walked to where Carmen was dishing out oatmeal from a massive pot. "Morning, mija. You sleep?" "Some." Carmen handed her a bowl. "Eat fast. Duke's gonna work you hard today. See if he can break you quick." Elena found a spot at the end of one table, as far from the staring men as possible, and ate without tasting the food. The silence was worse than open hostility. At least with hostility, you knew where you stood. She was scraping the last of the oatmeal from her bowl when Duke Harlan walked in. He didn't even look at her, just jerked his head toward the door. "Mercer, outside, now!" She followed him into the yard where the sky was starting to lighten along the eastern horizon. The air smelled like dust and horses and something else. Maybe sage. Maybe just distance. Duke stopped near the barn and turned to face her. "You're on stable duty. That means mucking stalls, hauling feed, cleaning tack, and anything else I tell you to do. You work till I say you're done. You don't complain, you don't slack off, and you sure as hell don't go running to the boss when things get tough. Clear?" "Yes." "Good. Tools are in the barn. Get started." He walked away, leaving her standing there alone. Elena found the barn easily enough. Inside it was dim and cool, with rows of stalls on either side and the smell of hay and manure thick in the air. She located a pitchfork, a wheelbarrow, and a shovel, and got to work. Mucking stalls was exactly as terrible as it sounded. The work was backbreaking. The smell was worse than anything at the textile mill, and by the time she'd done 3 stalls, her hands were raw despite the calluses she'd built up from factory work. But she kept going. One stall after another, pitch the old hay and manure into the wheelbarrow, wheel it out to the muck pile behind the barn. Come back. Repeat. The sun climbed higher. The barn got hotter. Sweat soaked through her dress, and her back started screaming sometime around stall number 8. She was on stall 12 when she heard voices outside. "Wasting his time. She'll be gone by week's end. You see her hands? Soft as a baby's. She ain't never done real work. Heard she was supposed to marry old James Whitmore. Lucky bastard died before he got stuck with her." Laughter. Harsh and deliberate, meant to carry. Elena gritted her teeth and kept working. Let them talk. Words couldn't hurt worse than this pitchfork was hurting her shoulders. By noon, she'd finished 15 stalls. Her dress was ruined, her hair had come loose from its pins, and she was pretty sure she smelled worse than the muck pile. Carmen brought her lunch, more beans, more cornbread, and sat with her in the shade behind the barn. "You doing okay, mija?" "I'm fine." Elena's voice came out rougher than she meant it to. Carmen gave her a look that said she wasn't fooled. "Duke's testing you, seeing if you quit." "I won't. I believe you, but—" Carmen hesitated. "The men here, they've been hurt before. By life, by loss, by things I don't ask about. They don't trust easy, especially women. To them, you just another mouth to feed till you run off like the others." "Others?" "Boss hired a woman once before, maybe 3 years ago. She lasted 2 days. Said the work was too hard and the men were too crude. Duke never lets anyone forget it." Elena looked down at her raw hands. "I'm not her." "No," Carmen agreed. "I don't think you are." The afternoon was more of the same, more stalls, more wheelbarrow trips, more pain in muscles Elena didn't know she had. But she finished. Every single stall in that barn, cleaned and filled with fresh hay. When she finally stumbled out of the barn near sunset, Duke was waiting. He walked down the aisle, checking her work with an expression like he was hoping to find something wrong. But there was nothing wrong. The stalls were clean, the hay was spread evenly. Even the tools were put away properly. Duke's jaw tightened. "Tomorrow, you're on fence repair with the morning crew. 4 a.m. start." Then he left. And Elena understood that this was going to be her life now. Duke throwing harder and harder work at her, waiting for her to break. She made it back to her cabin, collapsed on the bed, and didn't move until Carmen knocked with dinner. "You still alive in there?" Elena opened the door. "Barely." Carmen handed her the plate with a small smile. "You did good today, mija. Better than good. The men, they notice." After Carmen left, Elena ate slowly, letting her body recover. Then she did something she hadn't planned on doing. She went to see the stallion. The corral was empty when she got there, but she could hear movement inside the barn. She found him in the last stall, the biggest one, with extra-high walls and a gate reinforced with steel bars. He stood in the back corner, head high, watching her approach with those same wild eyes. "Hey," Elena said quietly. "Remember me?" The horse didn't move, didn't come closer, but he didn't retreat either. "I don't know what happened to you," she continued, keeping her voice soft. "Maybe you were born wild. Maybe someone hurt you. But I understand being scared. I understand not trusting people who say they want to help. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the piece of cornbread she'd saved from dinner. I'm not going to push. I'm just going to be here if you want. Elena set the cornbread on the ground near the stall gate and stepped back. Then she sat down, right there in the barn aisle, and leaned against the wall. The stallion watched her for a long time. Minutes passed. Somewhere outside, men were laughing. A door slammed. The day's heat was finally starting to fade. Then, slowly, the horse took one step forward, then another. He reached the gate, lowered his massive head, and picked up the cornbread with surprisingly gentle lips. Elena didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, while the black stallion chewed and watched her with slightly less fear in his eyes. "Good boy," she whispered. The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. Elena stayed there until full dark, just sitting, just being present. When she finally got up to leave, her legs had gone stiff and her back was threatening to never work right again. But the stallion had taken food from her hand, and that felt like something. Back in her cabin, Elena lay down and stared at the ceiling, too tired to even take off her boots. Tomorrow would bring fence repair at 4 in the morning, more hostility from Duke, more stares from men who wanted her to fail. But tomorrow would also bring another chance to visit the stallion. Another small moment of connection in a place that felt as wild and dangerous as the horse himself. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, Elena Mercer felt something that might have been hope. The week that followed tested every bit of strength Elena didn't know she had. Fence repair meant riding out before dawn with 3 silent men who treated her like a ghost. There, but not worth acknowledging. It meant learning to string barbed wire without cutting her hands to ribbons, pounding posts into ground so hard it felt like hitting rock, and working through heat that made her vision swim. Duke found new ways to make her life difficult, extra tasks that appeared at the end of long days, equipment that mysteriously went missing right when she needed it, little humiliations designed to remind her she wasn't wanted. But Elena kept working, kept showing up, kept doing every job thrown at her without complaint. And every evening, after the last meal was done and her body was screaming for rest, she went to visit the stallion. It became a ritual. She'd bring some small offering, a bit of bread, an apple core, once even a sugar cube Carmen slipped her with a knowing smile, and sit outside his stall. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she just sat in silence. The horse gradually came closer, spent more time at the gate, let his guard drop by tiny increments. On the 8th night, he let her touch his nose through the bars. Elena's hand shook as she reached out, moving so slowly it seemed like time had stopped. The stallion's nostrils flared, his muscles tensed, but he didn't pull away. Her fingertips brushed the soft muzzle, and something in her chest cracked open. "You're not mean," she whispered. "You never were." The horse exhaled, a warm breath across her palm, and for just a moment the wildness in his eyes eased. Then footsteps sounded behind her. Elena turned and found Caleb Boone standing in the barn doorway, silhouetted against the last light of day. She had no idea how long he'd been there. "He let you touch him." It wasn't a question. "Yes." Boone walked closer, moving with that same quiet authority she'd noticed the first day. The stallion's ears went back slightly, but he didn't retreat. "I've had 6 men try to work with that horse. 4 quit. 2 got sent to the doctor. Duke wants me to sell him before someone gets killed." "He's not going to kill anyone." Boone's eyes shifted to her, pale and unreadable in the dimness. "You sound real certain about that." "I am." "Why?" Elena looked at the stallion, then back at Boone. "Because he's not fighting anymore. He's asking." "Asking what?" "If it's safe to stop running." The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them said. Finally, Boone spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "You came here 2 weeks ago wearing a wedding dress meant for a dead man. You got no experience, no skills for this kind of work, and half my crew thinks you'll be gone before the month's out. But you're still here. Why?" "Because I don't have anywhere else to go," Elena said honestly, "and because leaving means giving up. I'm tired of giving up." Something flickered across Boone's face. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. Whatever it was gone before Elena could be sure she'd seen it. "Keep working with him," Boone said. "But you do it during your own time, not work hours. And if he hurts you, that's on you. He started to leave, then paused. Duke says you're doing good work. Won't admit it to your face, but he told me you haven't missed a day or complained once. That's more than most men last around here. Then he was gone, and Elena was alone again with the black stallion and a strange warmth spreading through her chest that might have been pride. 3 weeks in, something shifted. The men stopped pretending she didn't exist. They started acknowledging her presence with small nods. One morning, someone left an extra cup of coffee at her usual spot in the cookhouse. Another day, when she was struggling with a particularly stubborn fence post, one of the older hands showed her a better technique without being asked. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was something. The stallion's progress was slower but just as real. He'd let her touch his face now, even his neck if she moved carefully. She'd started talking to him more, telling him about St. Louis, about her parents, about the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who looked through you like you were made of glass. I know what it's like, she told him one evening, running her hand along his powerful shoulder. Feeling like you have to fight or die. Like trust is a luxury you can't afford. The horse's dark eye fixed on her, and Elena could have sworn she saw understanding there. But maybe, she continued softly, maybe we're both tired of being scared all the time. She didn't notice Caleb Boone standing in the shadows again until he spoke. You think fear is something you can just decide to stop feeling? Elena's hand stilled on the stallion's neck. No, but I think you can decide whether to let it make your choices for you. Boone stepped into the light. He looked tired, she realized. The kind of tired that came from carrying weight for so long, you forgot it was there. You know anything about why this ranch is called Ryder Boone? He asked. No. Ryder was my son. He was 5 years old when he died. Same fever that took my wife. The words hit Elena like stones. She hadn't known, hadn't even thought to ask. After they were gone, Boone continued, his voice flat and distant, I couldn't stand hearing my own name attached to this place. So I changed it, put my son's name on every gate and fence post, thinking maybe that would make him less gone. It didn't. Elena didn't know what to say. What could anyone say to that kind of loss? I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. Boone's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw past the cold stone exterior to the raw grief beneath. Fear don't go away just because you decide to ignore it. It lives in your bones, changes how you see everything, makes you... He paused, searching for words. Makes you into someone you don't recognize. Is that what happened to you? The question escaped before Elena could stop it. Boone's jaw tightened. For a second she thought he'd turn and leave, offended by her boldness. But instead he gave a small, bitter laugh. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. He looked at the stallion, who was watching them both with wary attention. Duke thinks I'm wasting time trying to save this horse. Says I should cut my losses and move on. Maybe he's right. He's not. Elena moved closer to the gate, her hand still on the horse's neck. This horse isn't broken. He just needs someone to prove that not everyone wants to hurt him. And you think you're that someone? I think I'm someone who understands what it feels like to be cornered. Boone studied her for a long moment. Then he did something Elena never expected. He smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. You're a strange woman, Elena Mercer. I know. Keep working with him, but be careful. Some things are too damaged to fix. He left before she could point out that he might be talking about more than just the horse. Elena turned back to the stallion, who had relaxed again now that they were alone. She rested her forehead against his neck and felt the warmth of his breathing, the steady thump of his heartbeat. We're going to be okay, she whispered. Both of us. The horse's ear flicked back toward her voice, and Elena chose to believe he understood. The change in the stallion didn't happen overnight, but it happened. By the end of her 4th week at the Ryder Boone Ranch, Elena could enter his stall without him pinning his ears back. She could run a brush over his coat while he stood mostly still, though his muscles would twitch and jump under her hands like he was constantly reminding himself not to bolt. Progress came in inches, not miles, but it was real. The men noticed. They couldn't help but notice because Duke made sure everyone knew about it, though not in the way Elena expected. Guess we got ourselves a horse whisperer, he announced one morning at breakfast, his voice dripping with sarcasm. That black devil's practically eating out of Mercer's hand now, Ain't that something? A few of the hands chuckled, but it was nervous laughter. Elena kept her eyes on her plate. Maybe the boss should put her in charge of all the problem horses, Duke continued. Hell, maybe she should run the whole operation. Seems she's got all the answers the rest of us are too stupid to figure out. Carmen made a sharp sound from the kitchen that might have been a Spanish curse. Miguel, her grandson, shot Duke a look that could have peeled paint. Elena finished her oatmeal and stood up to leave. As she passed Duke's chair, he stuck his boot out just far enough that she had to step over it, not quite tripping her, but making his point. Careful where you walk, Mercer. Wouldn't want you to fall. She met his eyes for just a second, long enough to let him know she wasn't scared, not long enough to give him an excuse to escalate. Then she walked out into the pre-dawn cold and went to start her work. But Duke's hostility was getting worse, not better. Elena felt it like a weight on her shoulders every time she walked across the ranch yard. He found reasons to assign her the dirtiest jobs, the ones that required working alone in the farthest corners of the property. He'd show up to inspect her work with a critical eye that seemed determined to find fault, even when there wasn't any. The other men kept their distance from the conflict. Nobody wanted to get on Duke's bad side, and Elena couldn't blame them. The foreman had been with Caleb Boone longer than anyone else on the ranch. Rumor was he'd helped bury Boone's wife and son when the fever took them. That kind of loyalty bought a man a lot of leeway. Still, Elena had started to notice small kindnesses. The way Cody, the young hand who'd nearly gotten trampled by the stallion that first day, would sometimes leave extra tools near her work site without saying anything. How Miguel made sure she got the slightly larger portion of meat at dinner. Even old Jack, the leather-faced ranch hand who hadn't spoken 3 words to her in a month, nodded at her one morning when she handled a spooked horse with calm efficiency. These were men who respected work, and Elena had proven she could work. It was Carmen who finally put words to what everyone was thinking. "You're making Duke look bad," she said one evening as Elena sat in the kitchen peeling potatoes. Carmen had started letting her help with meal prep sometimes, partly because she needed the extra hands, partly because she seemed to genuinely enjoy Elena's company. "I'm not trying to make anyone look bad. I'm just doing my job." "I know that, mija. But Duke, he don't see it that way. To him, you're a woman who walked in here with nothing and somehow got the one thing he couldn't get, respect from that black horse and attention from the boss." Carmen's knife moved through an onion with practiced efficiency. "Duke's been foreman here for 10 years. He knows this ranch inside out, works harder than 3 men combined. But respect from Caleb? That's something he's always had to fight for. Caleb respects him. I've seen it. Respects his work, yes. But there's a difference between that and actual trust. Caleb keeps everyone at arm's length since his family died. Even Duke. Maybe especially Duke, because Duke was there and saw him fall apart." Elena thought about that while she worked. About how grief could make you push away the people who loved you most, because they were witnesses to your breaking and you couldn't stand being seen that way. "What was Caleb like before?" she asked quietly. "Before his wife and son died?" Carmen's hands stilled for a moment. "Different. He smiled more, laughed even. Used to hold his boy on his shoulders while he walked the property, teaching him the names of every plant and animal. His wife Sarah, she was kind. Used to help me in this kitchen, actually. Said she didn't want to be the kind of ranch wife who sat around while everyone else worked." "How did it happen? The fever?" "Started with Ryder. He got sick so fast, and then Sarah caught it trying to nurse him. They were both gone within a week." Carmen's voice had gone soft. "Caleb buried them on the hill behind the main house, under the oak tree where Sarah used to read stories to the boy. After that, something in him just closed up, like he decided feeling anything at all was too dangerous." Elena understood that impulse better than Carmen probably realized. After her parents died, she'd spent months moving through life like a ghost, afraid that if she let herself feel the loss, it would swallow her whole. The textile mill had been a blessing in disguise. The work was mind-numbing enough that she didn't have to think, didn't have to feel, just had to survive one shift after another until enough time had passed that the grief became bearable. "He talks to you sometimes," Carmen said, glancing at Elena. "I've seen him by the barn when you're working with the stallion. That's more than he's talked to anyone in years outside of giving orders. He's just checking on the horse." "Mija, I've known that man for 15 years. He ain't checking on the horse." Before Elena could figure out how to respond to that, Miguel burst into the kitchen with wild eyes. Abuela, come quick! The black horse! Something's wrong! Elena dropped the potato she was holding and ran. She reached the barn before Carmen, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The stallion was down in his stall, lying on his side, his breathing fast and shallow. His coat was dark with sweat, and his eyes had rolled back to show the whites. No, no, no! Elena fumbled with the gate latch. Her hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get it open. Don't go in there! Duke's voice came from behind her, sharp with command. That horse is dangerous even when he ain't sick. He's dying! Elena shoved the gate open and dropped to her knees beside the stallion's massive head. Up close, she could see he was trembling, his muscles twitching under the skin. His breathing sounded wrong, wet and rattling. Caleb Boone appeared in the stall doorway. He took one look at the horse and his jaw tightened. How long's he been like this? I don't know. I just found him. Elena's hand was on the stallion's neck, feeling the too fast pulse beneath the sweat-soaked coat. What's wrong with him? What do we do? We put him down before he suffers more. Duke had followed Caleb in, and he had that same rifle from the first day. This is what happens when you try to save something that's already broken. He was probably sick when we got him, just took this long to show. No. The word came out harder than Elena intended. We're not shooting him. Girl, look at him. He's dying anyway. Best thing we can do is make it quick. Elena looked up at Caleb, silently begging him to see what she saw. That this horse had fought too hard to give up now. That sometimes the things that looked broken were just waiting for someone to believe they were worth saving. Caleb stared down at the stallion for a long moment. Then he said, Duke, get Doc Harrison out here. Tell him it's urgent. Boss, the doc's going to charge a fortune to come look at a horse. And for what? So we can watch it die expensive instead of cheap? I didn't ask for your opinion. Get the doctor. Now. Duke's face went red, but he left. Elena heard his boots hitting the ground hard, each step an expression of anger he couldn't voice out loud. Caleb knelt down on the other side of the stallion. You got any idea what's wrong with him? No, but he's burning up. Feel his neck. Caleb placed his hand where Elena indicated and swore quietly. That's fever, all right. Bad one. What causes that? An infection? Could be a lot of things. Infected wound, bad feed, disease he picked up out on the range before we caught him. Caleb's voice was steady, but Elena could see tension in the way he held his shoulders. Doc Harrison will know more, if he can get here in time. They sat there together, 2 people on opposite sides of a dying horse, and waited. Elena kept her hand on the stallion's neck, feeling each labored breath. The horse's eye was half closed now, and she wondered if he even knew they were there. Don't you dare give up, she whispered. I didn't come all this way just to watch you quit. Caleb looked at her across the stallion's body. You really care about this animal. Of course I do. Why? You've only known him a few weeks. Elena met his eyes. Because he trusted me. That's not something I take lightly. Something in Caleb's expression shifted, softened in a way she'd never seen before. But before he could respond, Carmen appeared with blankets and Miguel hauling buckets of cold water. We need to bring the fever down, Carmen said, already moving with the efficiency of someone who'd dealt with sickness before. Miguel, get those blankets soaked. We're going to pack him in cold water, try to cool him off before his brain cooks. They worked together, the 4 of them, wrapping the stallion in dripping blankets and replacing them as soon as they warmed. The horse barely responded, just lay there shaking while they fought to save him. Elena lost track of time. Could have been an hour, could have been 3. Her back ached from crouching, her arms were numb from hauling water, and she was soaked through to the skin. But the stallion's breathing started to ease. The terrible wet rattle faded to something more normal. His eye opened a bit wider, focusing on Elena's face. That's it, she murmured. Stay with us. Doc Harrison finally arrived near midnight, a graying man with spectacles and a leather bag that looked older than Elena. He examined the horse with gentle hands while Caleb filled him in on what had happened. Infection, most likely, the doctor said finally. See this wound on his shoulder? Looks old, probably from barbed wire or a tree branch. Got infected, spread through his system. The fever's the body trying to fight it off. He pulled supplies from his bag. I'm going to lance this, drain the infection, and give him a course of medicine. After that, it's up to him whether he's strong enough to pull through. What are his chances? Caleb asked. Doc Harrison gave him a level look. Honestly, not good. He's weak, the infection's advanced, and horses are fragile creatures despite their size. I've seen them die from less. But there's a chance. There's always a chance. Question is whether it's worth the money you're going to spend finding out. Do whatever you need to do. The doctor worked while they watched. Lancing the wound was brutal. The stallion tried to thrash, and it took both Caleb and Miguel holding him down to keep him still enough for the doctor to work. Elena stayed by his head, hands on either side of his face, talking to him in a low, steady voice, even though she had no idea if he could hear her. You're going to be okay, just hold on. We're helping you, I promise. Just hold on. When the doctor finally finished, the wound was clean and packed with some kind of paste that smelled like pine and something medicinal. He left instructions for changing the dressing twice a day and a bottle of white powder to be mixed with the horse's feed. Keep him comfortable. Keep the fever down if it spikes again. And pray. If you're the praying type, that's about all you can do now. After the doctor left, Caleb stood up and looked at Elena. She was still on the ground next to the stallion, one hand on his neck, exhausted beyond measure. You should get some rest. I'm staying with him. Elena, I'm staying. She looked up at Caleb, and she must have looked half wild herself, soaked and dirty and stubborn. He shouldn't be alone. Caleb studied her face for a long moment. Then he grabbed a blanket from the pile Carmen had brought and tossed it to her. Suit yourself. But if he gets worse, you come get me immediately. Understood? Yes. He left, taking Carmen and Miguel with him. The barn fell quiet except for the stallion's breathing and the small sounds of the other horses shifting in their stalls. Elena wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and leaned against the stall wall. Every muscle in her body ached. Her clothes were damp and cold, but she'd meant what she said. She wasn't leaving. You're going to make it, she told the stallion. You have to, because if you give up now, then Duke was right all along, and I refuse to let him be right. The horse's ear flicked toward her voice. It was a small movement, barely there, but it was something. Elena closed her eyes and dozed in fits and starts, jerking awake every time the stallion moved or made a sound. Sometime before dawn, she felt a presence and opened her eyes to find Caleb Boone sitting across from her in the stall, his back against the opposite wall. Couldn't sleep? She asked, her voice rough. Figured you could use the company. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stallion breathe. The horse seemed more peaceful now. His trembling had eased, though he still hadn't tried to stand. I had a dog when I was a boy, Caleb said suddenly. Old Mutt probably had some hound in him. My father said he was worthless, couldn't hunt, couldn't herd, just took up space and ate food we couldn't spare. He paused. But that dog loved me. Used to follow me everywhere, sleep at the foot of my bed. When he got sick, my father wanted to shoot him. Said it was a waste of time and money to try to save a worthless animal. What did you do? Spent every penny I'd saved and some I borrowed to pay the vet. My father beat me bloody for it. Said I was soft. Said I'd never make it as a rancher if I couldn't make the hard choices. Caleb's voice had gone flat. But that dog lived another 6 years, and he was there when I needed him, which is more than I can say for most people. Elena understood what he was really saying. You think Duke's wrong about the horse. I think Duke sees the world in terms of profit and loss, useful and worthless. It's made him a good foreman, but it's also made him hard in ways that don't serve him. Caleb looked at her. You see things different. You look at broken things and see possibility. That's rare. It's not rare. It's just refusing to give up on things that matter. And this horse matters to you. Yes. Why? Elena thought about how to answer that. Because nobody else thought he was worth the trouble, and I know what that feels like. Caleb's expression changed, became something softer and more open than she'd ever seen from him. Yeah, he said quietly. I expect you do. They stayed there together through the rest of the night, not talking much, just keeping watch. When the sky outside started to lighten, the stallion finally lifted his head. It was a shaky movement, weak and uncertain, but his eyes were clear. Elena's breath caught. Hey, welcome back. The horse looked at her, and she would have sworn he recognized her. His nose twitched, and he made a soft sound, not quite a nicker, but close. Caleb stood up slowly, careful not to startle the animal. I'll get Carmen to make him some warm mash. You should eat something too. In a minute. He left, and Elena moved closer to the stallion's head, She ran her hand down his face, feeling the warmth there that was normal heat now, not fever. "You scared me," she told him. "Don't do that again." The horse leaned into her touch, just slightly, and Elena felt something in her chest expand until it almost hurt. She'd saved him. They'd saved him. And in doing so, she'd proven something, to the ranch, to Duke, maybe even to herself. That broken things could heal if someone cared enough to try. The next few days were a blur of careful nursing. Elena changed the stallion's wound dressing like the doctor had shown her, mixed the medicine into his feed, and spent hours just sitting with him while he recovered. The horse grew stronger day by day. By the end of the week, he was standing on his own. By the end of 2 weeks, he was walking around his stall, testing his legs. The change in how the ranch treated Elena was immediate and undeniable. Men who'd barely looked at her before now stopped to ask how the horse was doing. Jack, the old leather-faced ranch hand, actually smiled at her one morning and said, "Heard you sat up with that devil all night. That took guts." Even Cody, who'd been hurt by the stallion that first day, came by to see him. "Don't look so mean now," he said, watching the horse eat hay with calm efficiency. "Looks almost normal." "He was always normal," Elena said. "Just scared." "Yeah, well, I guess you were right about that." But Duke's attitude grew darker. He stopped making sarcastic comments and started making mistakes, assigning Elena to jobs that had already been done, giving her directions to wrong locations, once even telling her to report for work at an hour that had her showing up to an empty work site in the pre-dawn cold. Carmen noticed. "He's trying to make you quit." "I know. Be careful, mija. Duke's a proud man and you've hurt his pride. Proud men do stupid things when they feel threatened." Elena wanted to argue that she hadn't done anything to threaten Duke, but she knew Carmen was right. Just by existing, by doing her job well, by connecting with the stallion in ways Duke couldn't, she'd become a threat to his authority. She kept her head down and her mouth shut, worked hard, stayed polite, gave Duke no ammunition to use against her. But she could feel the tension building like a storm on the horizon. The explosion came on a Saturday night. Elena had finished her work and gone to check on the stallion, as she did every evening. The horse was doing well. His wound had healed clean, his appetite was back, and he'd started showing interest in the other horses, calling to them over the stall walls. She was brushing his coat, talking to him about nothing in particular, when Duke appeared in the barn doorway. "Mercer, need to talk to you." Something in his voice made her wary. "About what?" "About the fact that you've been neglecting your actual work to play with that damn horse." Elena set down the brush carefully. "I do my work during work hours. This is my own time." "Your own time?" Duke walked closer and she could smell whiskey on him. Not drunk, but close. "You think you can just do whatever you want around here because the boss has taken a shine to you?" "I don't think that at all." "Sure you do. You think because you saved that horse, you're special, that the rules don't apply to you." He was standing too close now, using his size to crowd her. "But let me tell you something, girl. This ranch don't run on miracles and pretty smiles. It runs on hard work and discipline, and you ain't near as important as you think you are." The stallion's ears went back. He moved between Elena and Duke, pushing his body in front of hers like a shield. Duke's eyes narrowed. "Even the damn horse thinks he owns you. That's what happens when you spend more time petting than working. Animals get confused about who's in charge." "The only one confused here is you." The words came out before Elena could stop them. "You're angry because I proved you wrong. About the horse, about women working on this ranch, about everything you've been so certain of. And instead of admitting that, you're trying to make me fail." Duke's face went red. "You got a smart mouth for someone who was begging for scraps a few weeks ago. And you've got a small mind for someone who's supposed to be running this place." The slap came so fast Elena didn't see it coming. Duke's hand caught her across the face hard enough to knock her sideways into the stall wall. The world spun, her cheek exploded with pain, and she tasted blood. The stallion screamed. Not a horse sound, a sound of pure rage. He reared up, hooves striking the air inches from Duke's head. Duke stumbled backward, almost fell. "You see? That animal's dangerous. Should have been shot weeks ago." "Get out." Elena's voice shook, but she held her ground. Blood dripped from her split lip. "Get out of this barn right now." "You don't give me orders. I said get out." "What the hell is going on here?" They both turned. Caleb Boone stood in the barn doorway, and the look on his face could have frozen fire. Duke straightened up, trying to regain his composure. Boss, I was just explaining to Mercer that she needs to focus more on her actual duties instead of... Did you hit her? Silence fell like a weight. Duke's jaw worked, but no words came out. Caleb walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. He looked at Elena's bleeding lip, at the red mark already forming on her cheek, and something in his expression went cold and hard. Did you hit her? She was being disrespectful. That's not what I asked. Duke's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Yeah, I hit her, and I'd do it again. She's getting above herself, boss. Someone needed to remind her of her place. Her place. Caleb's voice had gone quiet, which was somehow worse than if he'd been shouting. You think her place is to take a beating from my foreman because she had the audacity to save a horse you wanted to shoot? That ain't what this is about. Then what is it about, Duke? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you hit a woman half your size because she made you look bad. Duke's face was the color of a bruise now. I've given this ranch 10 years, boss. 10 years of blood and sweat and loyalty. And you're going to take her side? Some mail-order bride who showed up out of nowhere? I'm taking the side of anyone on my property who doesn't settle disagreements with their fists. Caleb's voice was hard as iron. You're done for the night, Duke. Go sleep it off. Tomorrow we'll talk about whether you still have a job here. You can't be serious. Do I look like I'm joking? Get off my property. Now! Duke stared at Caleb for a long moment, his face twisted with anger and something that might have been hurt. Then he turned and stormed out of the barn, his boots echoing in the silence. Caleb turned to Elena. You all right? I'm fine. She wiped blood from her lip with the back of her hand. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. He moved closer, studying her face with concern that felt almost painful in its sincerity. He had no right to touch you. None. He's been your foreman for 10 years. And in those 10 years, he's never laid hands on anyone who worked for me. There are lines you don't cross, no matter how long you've been somewhere. Caleb's voice softened slightly. Come on, let's get Carmen to look at that cut. I need to finish with the horse. The horse is fine. You're not. Elena wanted to argue, but the adrenaline was wearing off, and her face hurt, and suddenly she was tired clear through to her bones. She let Caleb lead her out of the barn, the stallion's worried nicker following them into the night. Carmen took one look at Elena's face and started cursing in rapid Spanish. She sat Elena down at the kitchen table and cleaned the cut with gentle efficiency, all while muttering about men who didn't know how to control their tempers. Caleb stood nearby, watching with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. You were wrong, you know, she said to him while Carmen worked. About me not being important. I didn't save that horse to prove anything to Duke or anyone else. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I know that. Do you? Caleb met her eyes. Yeah, I do. And that's why Duke's so threatened by you. Because you do the right thing without thinking about the cost. And he's spent so long calculating costs that he's forgotten what right even looks like. Carmen finished bandaging Elena's lip and stepped back. You're going to have a bruise, but you'll live. Go rest, mija. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Elena stood up, swaying slightly. Caleb reached out to steady her, his hand warm on her arm. Thank you, she said, for standing up for me. It's what anyone would have done. No, it's what you did. There's a difference. She left before he could respond, walking back to her cabin through the dark. The cool air felt good on her swollen face. She could still hear the stallion calling somewhere in the distance, probably wondering where she'd gone. Inside her cabin, Elena lay down on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Her face throbbed, her body ached. But underneath all that pain was something else, a fierce satisfaction that she'd stood her ground, even when it cost her. Duke had tried to break her and failed. Caleb had defended her when he could have easily taken his foreman's side. The stallion had tried to protect her, had screamed his rage when someone hurt her. She wasn't alone anymore. Somehow, in this brutal place surrounded by hard men and harder land, Elena Mercer had found people who cared whether she lived or died, and that was worth every bruise. Morning came too early and brought trouble with it. Elena woke to shouting outside her cabin, angry male voices cutting through the dawn quiet like knives. She pulled on her boots and stepped outside to find half the ranch hands gathered near the cookhouse, with Duke Harlan standing in the center like a preacher at a revival. "All I'm saying is we got a right to know what's happening," Duke was saying, his voice carrying across the yard. "Boss fires me after 10 years of loyal service because some woman batted her eyes and played damsel in distress. That affect all of us. Nobody's firing you yet." That was Jack, the old ranch hand, looking uncomfortable. "Boss just said you two would talk." "Talk." Duke spat the word like it tasted bad. "Man can't even discipline his own workers without getting called on the carpet. This ranch is going soft, and you all know it." Elena's stomach twisted. She started to turn back into her cabin. This wasn't her fight, and getting in the middle of it would only make things worse. But Carmen appeared at her elbow. "Don't hide, mija. You got nothing to be ashamed of." "I'm not ashamed. I just don't want to make this bigger than it already is." "Too late for that." Carmen nodded toward the main house, where Caleb Boone had just stepped onto the porch. He took in the gathered men with one sweeping glance, his face unreadable. "Duke, my office. Now." Duke's jaw tightened, but he followed Caleb into the house. The other hands dispersed slowly, heading toward breakfast with muttered conversations Elena couldn't quite hear. She caught fragments. "Never seen the boss this worked up, and woman's gonna tear this place apart. And Duke's got a point, though, don't he?" Miguel touched her arm gently. "Come eat. Abuela made extra biscuits." The cookhouse felt tense. Men ate in silence, shooting glances at Elena when they thought she wasn't looking. She forced down food she couldn't taste while Carmen moved around the kitchen with tight efficiency, clanging pots louder than necessary. It was Cody who finally broke the silence. "For what it's worth, Miss Elena, Duke had no call to hit you. Don't matter what you said to him." A few heads nodded. Not many, but some. Elena felt a flicker of gratitude. "I appreciate that. But he ain't wrong about everything." This came from a lean ranch hand named Webb, who Elena had barely spoken to in all her weeks here. "This place has changed since you showed up. Used to be we all knew where we stood. Now there's complications." "Complications," Elena repeated flatly. "That what you call not wanting to watch a man beat a woman?" "I call it Duke being pushed past his limit by someone who don't know her place yet." Webb's tone wasn't hostile, just matter of fact. "You're good with that horse, I'll give you that. And you work hard. But you're still new, and new people don't get to upset the whole order of things without consequence." "Order." Elena set down her fork. "The order where Duke decides who gets hit and who doesn't? That the order you're defending?" "The order where a foreman's authority means something," Webb shot back. "You undermine that, the whole ranch falls apart." "Then maybe the ranch needs to fall apart." The words hung in the air like gunsmoke. Elena hadn't meant to say them, but now that they were out, she couldn't take them back. Jack let out a low whistle. "Girl's got brass, I'll give her that." "Brass or stupidity?" Webb stood up. "Either way, I'm not watching this ranch tear itself in half over someone who'll probably be gone in 6 months anyway." He left. 2 other men followed him. The remaining hands focused very intently on their plates. Carmen came over and refilled Elena's coffee with hands that shook slightly. "That went well," she muttered in Spanish. Before Elena could respond, the cookhouse door banged open and Caleb walked in. Every head turned toward him. His expression was grim, and there was something in his eyes that made Elena's stomach drop. "Duke's staying on as foreman," he announced, "but he's been warned that if he ever lays hands on anyone on this property again, he's done. No second chances. That clear to everyone?" Silence. Then nods, reluctant, but there. Caleb's gaze found Elena. "Miss Mercer, I need to speak with you. Outside." She followed him into the yard, her heart pounding. The morning sun was just clearing the hills, throwing long shadows across the dusty ground. Caleb walked a few paces away from the cookhouse, then stopped and turned to face her. "I should have fired him." Elena blinked. "What?" "Duke. I should have fired him last night, but I didn't, and now you're going to pay the price for my cowardice." "You're not a coward. You're trying to hold this ranch together." "By keeping a man who hit you? That's not holding things together. That's choosing the easy path because firing Duke would cause chaos. And I don't—" He stopped, jaw working. "I don't handle chaos well. Not anymore." Elena studied his face, the tension around his eyes, the exhaustion carved into the lines beside his mouth. What did Duke say? In your office? That you provoked him, that he's been too patient with your attitude, that the men are starting to question his authority because I let you get away with things I'd punish anyone else for. Caleb's voice was bitter. And he's not entirely wrong. I have been easier on you than I would be on another worker. Because I'm a woman? Because you remind me that there's more to life than just surviving it. The words came out rough, like they'd been pulled from somewhere deep. Because watching you with that horse, seeing you refuse to give up on something everyone else had written off, it made me remember who I used to be. Before. Elena's throat tightened. Caleb, but that's not fair to you or to the other hands. You can't be the exception to every rule just because I need to remember how to be human again. He looked away. Duke's right about that much. There can't be two sets of rules. So what are you saying? I'm saying you deserve better than this. Better than a ranch where half the men resent you and the foreman wants you gone. Better than being caught in the middle of my mess. He met her eyes again. I can give you 3 months' wages, enough to get you to San Francisco or Denver, somewhere with real opportunities. You could start over, make a real life. For a moment, Elena couldn't breathe. He was trying to be kind, trying to give her an out, a way to escape the disaster she'd walked into. But all she heard was that she was being sent away, that she'd become too much trouble, too complicated, too expensive to keep around. I don't want to go to San Francisco. Elena, I said I don't want to go. Her voice came out harder than she intended. You think giving me money and sending me away solves anything? It just means Duke wins. It means he gets to keep being the way he is, and you get to avoid dealing with it, and I get to run away like I always do when things get difficult. This isn't about running away. It's about keeping you safe. I don't need you to keep me safe. I need you to... She stopped, realizing what she was about to say, what she'd been feeling for weeks now without letting herself acknowledge it. Need me to what? Caleb's voice had dropped to something quieter, more careful. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who defended her to his foreman, who sat up all night in a barn because he thought she shouldn't be alone, who looked at her like she was something precious, even when he was trying to send her away for her own good. I need you to stop trying to protect me from everything, she said finally. I know this ranch is hard. I know Duke hates me. I know half the men think I'm going to disappear any day now. But I chose to be here. I chose to stay. And you don't get to take that choice away just because it's messy. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something Elena had never seen him do. He smiled. Not the small, bitter smile from before, but something real and warm and almost painful to watch. You're stubborn as hell, you know that? I've been told. All right, you can stay, but there are going to be conditions. Like what? Like you report any problems with Duke directly to me. You don't try to handle it yourself. You don't let it escalate. Understood? Yes. And you keep working with the stallion. I want that horse trained properly, not just tame enough to survive. If you can do with him what I think you can, he'll be worth twice what I paid. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. I can do that. Good. Caleb glanced back toward the cookhouse, where faces were probably pressed against the windows. This isn't going to be easy. Duke's going to make your life difficult, and some of the men are going to follow his lead. But if you're sure, I'm sure. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then get to work. That stallion's not going to train himself. Elena turned to go, then paused. Caleb? Thank you. For giving me a choice. His expression softened. You've been making your own choices since you got here. I'm just trying to catch up. She left him standing in the yard and headed toward the barn, feeling like something important had just shifted between them, something that didn't have a name yet but was real enough to make her hands shake slightly as she opened the stallion's stall. The horse greeted her with a low nicker, already moving toward the gate. His wound had healed to a pink scar on his shoulder, and his coat gleamed with health. He looked like a different animal from the terrified, rage-filled creature she'd first seen 2 months ago. Hey, beautiful, she murmured, running her hand down his neck. Ready to show everyone what you can really do? Over the next few weeks, Elena threw herself into training the stallion with single-minded focus. She started with groundwork, teaching him to respond to voice commands, to move when she asked, to trust that her directions wouldn't hurt him. The horse learned fast. He was smart. She'd always known that, but now without fear clouding his mind, his intelligence showed through clear and sharp. She named him Midnight because Carmen said every horse deserved a name and that black devil didn't count. The men started gathering to watch her work. At first it was just Cody and Miguel, then Jack wandered over one evening, then others. Even Webb, who'd said she was tearing the ranch apart, came to lean against the fence and observe in skeptical silence. "He's listening to her," Cody said one day, sounding amazed. "Look at that. She just speaks, and he does what she wants." "It's not magic," Elena called over, not breaking her focus on Midnight. "It's patience, and paying attention to what he's trying to tell me." "Still looks like magic from here," Jack said, and there was respect in his voice that hadn't been there before. Duke never came to watch, but Elena could feel him tracking her progress, filing away every success like evidence of some crime she was committing. He found other ways to remind her who had power on this ranch, assigning her the worst jobs, making sure she worked late when everyone else got to rest, creating problems only she could solve, and then criticizing how she solved them. But the other men were changing. Slowly, grudgingly, they were starting to see her as something other than an interloper. She'd proven herself with hard work, proven herself again by saving Midnight, and now she was proving herself daily by doing something none of them had managed, turning a killer horse into something magnificent. It was Carmen who pointed out what everyone else was too polite to mention. "The boss watches you too, you know, every evening when you're with Midnight. He stands on his porch like he's checking the weather, but his eyes are always on you." Elena kept her focus on chopping vegetables, her face warm. "He's just making sure I'm doing the job he hired me for." "Mija, I've known that man 15 years. The way he looks at you ain't about the job." "Carmen, I'm not saying it's proper or right. I'm just saying it's true." Carmen's voice softened. "He's been dead inside since Sarah and Ryder passed. But you're bringing him back to life whether you mean to or not. That's dangerous for both of you." "Nothing's going to happen. He's the boss, and I'm just the woman who's got him feeling things again. That's not a small thing, Elena. Be careful with it. With him." Elena wanted to deny it, wanted to say Carmen was seeing things that weren't there. But late at night in her cabin, she thought about the way Caleb looked at her sometimes, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve, or maybe a door he was afraid to open. She thought about his smile in the yard, about the night they'd sat together watching over Midnight, about the way he'd defended her even when it cost him. And she had to admit, at least to herself, that Carmen wasn't wrong. The storm came on a Tuesday evening in late spring, rolling in from the west with clouds so black they looked bruised. The air went still and heavy, that peculiar pressure that came before violence. "Get the horses secured," Caleb ordered, his voice cutting across the ranch yard. "Everything loose goes in the barn. Move." Elena was in Midnight's stall when the first drops hit, fat and cold. The stallion shifted nervously, ears swiveling to catch sounds she couldn't hear. She ran her hand down his neck, murmuring reassurance, but her own nerves were jangling. She'd lived through storms in St. Louis, but those had been city storms, dangerous in their own way, but contained by buildings and streets. Out here on the open range, storms could kill, could flood creeks in minutes, could strike you dead with lightning, could send animals into panics that ended with broken bones or worse. "Elena!" Miguel ran into the barn, his face urgent. "Abuela needs help securing the cookhouse. The wind's getting bad." "Go," she told him. "I'll make sure the horses are settled and meet you there." She moved down the line of stalls, checking latches and water buckets, speaking calmly to each nervous animal. The wind was picking up outside, making the barn walls creak. Thunder rumbled, distant but coming closer. She was almost done when she heard it, a crack like the world breaking, and then a scream. Elena ran toward the sound and found chaos. One of the paddock gates had blown open, and horses were scattering into the storm. Rain was sheeting down now, turning the ground to mud, and in the middle of it all was a panicked mare dragging a young ranch hand named Peter who'd gotten tangled in her lead rope. "Let go!" someone was shouting. "Peter, let go of the rope!" But Peter couldn't let go. The rope was wrapped around his wrist, and the mare was bucking and rearing, her eyes rolling white with terror. Every move she made jerked him off his feet. It was only a matter of time before she trampled him or broke his neck. Elena didn't think. She just ran into the paddock, her boots sliding in the mud. The mare saw her coming and wheeled, hooves striking out. Elena dodged left, got close enough to grab the mare's halter. Easy, easy, you're all right. She kept her voice steady even though her heart was trying to beat out of her chest. The mare jerked her head, but Elena held on. Nobody's going to hurt you. Just settle down. Elena, get out of there. That was Caleb's voice, coming from somewhere close. That horse is going to kill you. The mare reared again. Elena went up with her, feet leaving the ground, but she didn't let go. Couldn't let go, because Peter was still tangled, and if this horse bolted, he'd be dragged to death. Then Caleb was there, appearing out of the rain like a ghost. He grabbed Peter and started unwinding the rope with quick, efficient movements, while Elena held the mare's head. Lightning cracked overhead, so close Elena felt it in her teeth. The mare screamed and tried to bolt. Almost got it, Caleb grunted. Just hold her. The rope came free. Peter stumbled backward, clutching his wrist. Caleb grabbed Elena and pulled her away from the mare just as another lightning strike lit up the whole sky. The mare bolted toward the open pasture, disappearing into the storm. Caleb's hands were on Elena's shoulders, his face inches from hers. Rain plastered his hair to his skull and ran in rivers down his face. Are you insane? That horse could have killed you. Peter was tangled. I saw what Peter was. I'm asking why you ran into the middle of it like you had a death wish. Because nobody else was helping. Elena shoved his chest, suddenly furious. What was I supposed to do, stand there and watch him die? Yes, you were supposed to let someone with experience handle it. Like who? You were all just standing around shouting. Caleb's grip tightened on her shoulders. For a second, she thought he might shake her. Then he did something she didn't expect. He pulled her against his chest in a grip that was almost crushing. You could have died, he said into her hair, his voice rough. That mare could have split your skull open, and you could have died right there in the mud, and I... He stopped, but Elena felt his whole body trembling. Not from cold, from something else entirely. She pulled back enough to look at his face. Rain ran between them, but she could see his eyes clearly. There was fear there, raw and honest. Fear for her. I'm all right, she said quietly. Caleb, I'm all right. His hand came up to her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. You're bleeding. She hadn't noticed, but now that he mentioned it, she could feel the sting. Must have caught herself on something in the chaos. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the way he was looking at her right now, like she was something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. His face was so close. His eyes had dropped to her mouth. Elena's breath caught. Boss! Duke's voice cut through the storm like a blade. We got 2 more horses loose, and the fence is down on the north pasture. Caleb's hand dropped away from her face. He stepped back, the walls slamming back down between them so fast Elena almost felt the wind of it. Get inside, he told her, his voice all business again. Get that cut looked at. I can help. That's an order, Miss Mercer. He walked away into the storm, leaving Elena standing alone in the rain with her heart hammering and her face burning where he'd touched her. The next morning brought blue skies and an exhausted, battered ranch. 3 horses had escaped in the storm. They found 2 within an hour, but the third, an older gelding, had broken his leg in a ravine and had to be put down. The north fence was destroyed. Part of the cookhouse roof had blown off, and the whole place had the shell-shocked feel of a battlefield after the fighting stopped. Elena worked alongside everyone else clearing debris, mending what could be mended, trying not to think about the moment in the storm when Caleb's hand had been on her face and the distance between them had shrunk to nothing. But that night, lying in her cabin, she couldn't stop replaying it. The way he'd held her, the fear in his voice, the look in his eyes that had said things his mouth wouldn't. And she had to admit the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks now. She was falling in love with Caleb Boone. It was a terrible, stupid, dangerous thing to feel. He was her employer. He was grieving a wife he clearly still loved. He was a man so damaged by loss that he'd spent 5 years building walls to keep everyone out. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she saw his face in the rain, felt his hands on her shoulders, heard the break in his voice when he'd said she could have died. Elena pulled her blanket up to her chin and stared at the ceiling, wondering how she'd let this happen. Wondering if Caleb felt even a fraction of what she felt. Wondering if anything good could possibly come from caring this much about someone who'd spent half a decade teaching himself not to care at all. The answer came 2 days later, though not in any way she expected. She was working with Midnight in the training paddock. They'd graduated to saddle work, and the horse was accepting the weight without panic. When she noticed men gathering near the barn, a wagon had arrived, fancy-looking, with someone important sitting in the back. Carmen appeared at her elbow. "That's Harrison Webb, Webb's uncle. He owns half of Black Hollow and 3 other ranches in the territory. What's he doing here?" "Nothing good, I'd bet." They watched as Caleb walked out to greet the man. The conversation was too distant to hear, but the body language was clear. Harrison Webb was used to getting what he wanted, and he wanted something from Caleb. Miguel ran over a few minutes later, breathless. "That man. He's offering to buy the ranch, says he'll pay top dollar. The boss looks like he's thinking about it." Elena's stomach dropped. Caleb wouldn't sell. This place is his whole life, I know. But Mr. Webb's saying things about how hard it is to run a ranch this size alone, how Caleb deserves to rest after all he's been through. Miguel's face was worried. And the boss? He looks tired enough to listen. Before Elena could respond, Duke appeared beside the wagon. His posture was deferential, agreeable. And when Harrison Webb gestured toward Elena and the stallion, Duke nodded and spoke at length, his hands moving in that way people did when they were telling stories. Elena's blood went cold. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could guess. That evening, Caleb summoned her to the main house. She'd never been inside before. Workers didn't go into the boss's private space unless something was seriously wrong. The house was spare and clean, with furniture that looked like it hadn't been moved in years. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal touches except for one framed drawing in a child's hand hanging near the kitchen door. A stick figure, man and boy, under a tree. Caleb stood by the fireplace, not looking at her. "Harrison Webb made me an offer today. Good offer. More than fair." Elena's throat tightened. "Are you going to take it?" "I'm thinking about it. This ranch has been my whole life for 15 years, but lately I've been wondering if maybe that's the problem. If maybe I'm holding on to something that should have died with—" He stopped. "Doesn't matter. Point is, Webb wants to buy, and I'm inclined to let him." "Why are you telling me this?" Now he looked at her, and his eyes were hard, deliberately hard, like he was trying to convince himself of something. "Because part of Webb's offer includes conditions. He wants to clean house, bring in his own foreman, his own crew. Says there's been talk in town about complications here, about me playing favorites with certain workers." Elena felt like she'd been punched. "Duke told him about us." "There is no us. You know what I mean." "Yeah, I do." Caleb's jaw worked. "Webb thinks you're a distraction, that I'm not running this ranch properly because I'm too worried about protecting you, and maybe he's not wrong." "So that's it? You're going to sell because some rich man doesn't like that you hired a woman?" "I'm going to sell because it's the smart move. Webb pays me out. I can go somewhere new, start over without all the—" He gestured vaguely, and Elena knew he meant the memories, the ghost. "Without all the weight. You're running away." His eyes flashed. "I'm being practical." "You're being a coward." The words came out hard, and Elena didn't regret them. "You spent 5 years telling yourself you were protecting this place, protecting your son's memory by keeping his name on every gate. But really, you were just hiding. And now that something real is happening, something that might actually require you to feel things again, you're going to run away and pretend it's about being practical. Watch yourself, Miss Mercer. Or what? You'll fire me? Sell the ranch out from under everyone who depends on it? Oh, wait. You're already planning to do that." She stepped closer to him, her hands shaking with anger. "I thought you were different. I thought underneath all that grief, you were still the man who spent every penny he had saving a dog his father said was worthless. But maybe your father was right. Maybe you're too soft to make the hard choices. Get out. Make me." For a second, Elena thought he might actually throw her out physically. His whole body was rigid with fury, his fists clenched at his sides. But then his expression changed to something worse than anger, something broken and sad. "Why do you even care?" His voice had gone quiet. "You've been here 3 months. This ranch is nothing to you. I'm nothing to you. Why does it matter if I sell?" Elena looked at him, really looked at him. At the exhaustion carved into his face, the grief he carried like stones in his pockets, the fear underneath everything else that if he let himself feel anything good, it would get taken away just like everything else had been taken. "It matters," she said. Because I love you. The words dropped into the silence like stones into water. Caleb stared at her, his face going pale. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do. I'm saying I love you. I'm saying that somewhere between you defending me to Duke and sitting up all night in a barn and pulling me out of that storm, I fell in love with you. And watching you throw away everything that matters because you're scared of being hurt again is breaking my heart. Elena, I'm not asking you to love me back. I'm not asking you to marry me or even acknowledge that what happened in the storm meant anything. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. I'm just asking you not to sell. Don't let Duke win. Don't let fear make your choices. Caleb stood there looking at her for a long moment. Then he turned away, his shoulders rigid. You should go. Elena left. She walked back to her cabin through the dark with tears running down her face and her whole body shaking. She'd laid herself bare, admitted something she'd barely acknowledged to herself, and he'd sent her away like it meant nothing. She should have kept her mouth shut, should have let him sell, should have taken whatever severance money he offered and disappeared. But she'd never been good at the smart choice, had never been good at protecting herself. Inside her cabin, Elena sat on the bed and let herself cry. For the ranch that would be sold. For the stallion she'd trained who'd probably be sent away to some other property. For the fool she'd made of herself falling in love with a man too broken to love her back. But mostly, she cried for Caleb. For the life he'd buried with his family and couldn't seem to let himself live again. Elena woke before dawn with her eyes swollen and her head pounding. She splashed water on her face, tied her hair back, and walked to the cookhouse like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't torn her chest open and shown Caleb Boone her heart, only to have him look away. Carmen took one glance at her face and started making coffee without a word. The kindness of it almost broke Elena all over again. The men filtered in for breakfast, quieter than usual. Word had spread about Harrison Webb's offer, about the possibility that the ranch might be sold, that they might all be looking for new work within the month. The uncertainty sat heavy in the room, flavoring every bite of food, every sip of coffee. Caleb didn't come to breakfast. Duke did, though, and there was something smug in the way he carried himself, like he'd won some game Elena hadn't known they were playing. "A lot of changes coming," Duke announced to the table, his voice carrying. "Boss is meeting with Webb again this morning. Smart move, if you ask me. This ranch has been dead weight for too long. Time for fresh blood." Jack pushed his plate away. "This ranch ain't dead. We had a good year." "Good year don't mean much if the man running it's got his head somewhere else." Duke's eyes flicked to Elena. "Distractions are expensive. Webb knows that. Why he's offering what he is." Elena kept her mouth shut and her eyes on her plate. She wouldn't give Duke the satisfaction of a reaction. After breakfast, she went to Midnight's stall. The horse greeted her with a soft nicker, pushing his nose against her shoulder. She wrapped her arms around his neck and breathed in his smell, hay and horse and something wild that hadn't quite been tamed out of him. "I don't know what's going to happen," she told him quietly. "Webb might sell you to someone else, or keep you, but with a different trainer who doesn't know you like I do." Her throat tightened. "I'm sorry, I should have kept my mouth shut. Should have just done my job instead of falling for a man who can't even look at me now." Midnight's ears swiveled toward her voice. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the emotion. He always did. Elena spent the morning working with him, running through the exercises they'd practiced hundreds of times. Midnight responded to every cue, his movements fluid and confident. He'd come so far from the terrified, rage-filled creature she'd first seen. He trusted her completely now, and she was going to lose him. She was leading him back to his stall when Miguel came running across the yard, his face panicked. "Elena, have you seen Midnight? Someone said he got out of his stall last night and—" He stopped, seeing the horse. "Oh, never mind." Elena's stomach went cold. "What do you mean, got out? He's been with me all morning." Duke was just telling the boss that Midnight escaped during the night, said he found the stall empty this morning and figured the horse had run off into the hills. Miguel's face was confused. "But that can't be right if you've had him." The pieces clicked together in Elena's mind with sickening clarity. Duke had told Caleb that Midnight was gone. Missing. Probably told him it was Elena's fault for not securing the stall properly. And Caleb, already looking for reasons to push her away, would have believed it. "Where's Caleb now?" "Still with Mr. Webb, I think." "In the house." Elena tied Midnight securely and started walking toward the main house. She was halfway there when the door opened and Caleb stepped out with Harrison Webb. Both men stopped when they saw her. Webb was exactly what Elena had expected. Well-dressed, well-fed, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He looked at her the way you'd look at a stray dog that had wandered onto your property. "This the girl Duke was telling me about?" Webb asked Caleb. "Miss Mercer, yes. The one who's been causing all the trouble." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "I haven't caused any trouble. I've been doing the job I was hired to do." Webb smiled, and it wasn't kind. "Duke tells a different story. Says you've been playing house with that black stallion, wasting time that should be spent on actual ranch work. Says you let the horse escape last night through carelessness. That true?" "No. Midnight's been in his stall all night and all morning. I just brought him back from training." Webb's eyebrows rose. He looked at Caleb. "Duke said the horse was gone." Caleb's face was unreadable. "Where's Duke now?" "Don't know, boss," Miguel said from behind Elena. "Haven't seen him since breakfast." Something was happening that Elena couldn't quite follow. Caleb's expression had changed, going from closed off to something harder, more focused. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, and she saw the gears turning behind his eyes. "Show me the horse," he said. They walked to Midnight's stall in silence, Elena, Caleb, Webb, and Miguel trailing behind. The stallion was right where she'd left him, standing calmly, not a mark on him. Caleb examined the stall door, the latch, the hinges. His jaw got tighter with each passing second. "This latch is fine. Horse couldn't have opened it himself." "Then Duke lied," Elena said. "He told you Midnight was gone so you'd think I was irresponsible, so you'd have another reason to sell." Webb made an impatient sound. "Now wait just a minute. Duke's been foreman here for years. Why would he lie about a horse?" "Because he wants me gone," Elena said flatly. "And he wants this ranch sold so he can work for you instead. He's been undermining Caleb since the day I got here." "That's a serious accusation," Webb said. "It's the truth." Caleb was still staring at the stall, his face pale. "Elena, go get Cody and Jack. Tell them I want Duke found, now." She ran, found Cody near the barn, and Jack mending fence. Within minutes, men were fanning out across the ranch looking for Duke. Elena's heart was hammering so hard she felt dizzy. They found him an hour later, or rather, they found what he'd been doing. In the tack room, hidden behind old saddles, was a collection of ranch supplies that had supposedly gone missing over the past 2 months. Tools, leather goods, even a small cash box that should have been in Caleb's office. And underneath it all, a set of bolt cutters and a length of rope that still had Midnight's black hair caught in the fibers. Duke wasn't in the tack room. He wasn't anywhere on the ranch property, but his horse was gone from the barn, and when Jack checked Duke's quarters, his personal belongings were cleared out. "He ran," Jack said, shaking his head. "Knew he was caught and ran like a coward." Caleb stood in the tack room doorway, staring at the evidence of Duke's betrayal. His hands were trembling slightly. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long has he been stealing from me?" "Don't know, boss. But from the look of this, could be months. Maybe longer." Jack's voice was rough with anger. "I never trusted him much, but I didn't think he'd do this." Webb had gone silent, his expression calculating. Finally, he said, "Boone, this changes things. A ranch with this kind of internal trouble isn't worth what I offered. I'll have to reconsider so—" "Don't bother." Caleb's voice cut through the air like a blade. "I'm not selling." Webb blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said I'm not selling. This ranch isn't for sale. Never was, really. I was just—" He stopped, looked at Elena. "I was just being a coward, like someone recently told me." "Now hold on," Webb started, but Caleb was already walking away, heading straight for Elena. "I need to talk to you. Alone." Elena followed him away from the barn, past the cookhouse, all the way to the hill behind the main house, where 2 graves sat under an old oak tree. She'd never been up here before. Had known the graves existed, but had respected Caleb's privacy enough not to intrude. The markers were simple wood, weathered by 5 years of sun and rain. Sarah Boone, Ryder Boone, beloved wife and mother, beloved son. The dates carved beneath told the story. They died within 2 days of each other. Caleb stood between the graves, not looking at Elena. I come up here every Sunday, sometimes more if I'm having a bad week. I talk to them like they can hear me. Tell them about the ranch, about problems I'm dealing with, about how much I miss them. His voice was raw. After they died, I told myself I'd never love anyone again, that it hurt too much, that I'd rather be alone than risk feeling that kind of loss a second time. Elena wanted to speak but didn't. This wasn't her moment, it was his. Then you showed up in a wedding dress meant for a dead man, and you were so stubborn and so damn brave, and you looked at that horse like he was worth saving when everyone else had given up. And I thought, he finally turned to face her. I thought maybe I could watch you from a distance, appreciate what you were doing without getting involved, without risking anything. But then Duke hit you and I wanted to kill him. And then you ran into that storm and almost died, and I realized I was already involved. That I'd been involved since the day you stood in front of that corral and told me that scared things fight. His eyes were bright. I was so scared, Elena, of feeling this, of what it would mean. So I tried to push you away by selling the ranch, by believing Duke's lies, by doing everything I could to make you leave before I had to admit the truth. What truth? Caleb stepped closer. Close enough that she could see every line of grief and fear and hope on his face. That I'm in love with you. That I have been for weeks. That last night when you told me how you felt, I sent you away because I was terrified of what it meant. But I'm more terrified of losing you. Elena's breath caught. Caleb, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to love someone without being afraid they'll be taken away. And I can't promise I won't mess this up, because I probably will. I'm damaged, and I'm scared, and I've spent 5 years teaching myself not to feel. He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling slightly as they closed around hers. But I want to try, if you'll let me. Elena looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. You hurt me. Last night, when you sent me away, you hurt me. I know. I'm sorry. And you might hurt me again. Because you're right. You are scared, and scared people do stupid things. I know that too. But I'm scared too, Elena said, her voice breaking. I'm scared that I'm not enough, that you'll always love Sarah more than you could ever love me, that I'm just a distraction from your grief instead of something real. Caleb's other hand came up to her face, cradling her cheek the way he had in the storm. You are real. You're the most real thing that's happened to me in 5 years. And yes, I loved Sarah. I'll always love her. But that doesn't mean there's no room for you. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't known was falling. Love isn't finite, Elena. It doesn't run out. I can honor what I had with her and still build something new with you. Are you sure? Because I can't. I won't be someone you settle for because you're lonely. I'm not lonely anymore. That's what you don't understand. You walked onto this ranch and brought it back to life, brought me back to life. The men work harder because they want to impress you. Carmen smiles more. Even that damn horse would die for you. His voice dropped to a whisper. And I would too, in a heartbeat, without question. Elena closed her eyes, letting herself feel the truth of his words. Then she opened them and said, I'm still angry at you. You should be. And I'm going to be scared sometimes that you'll push me away again. I probably will, but I'll try not to. That's not very reassuring. It's the best I can offer. Caleb's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. I'm a work in progress, Elena. Just like that horse of yours. Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the genuine possibility that this might end badly, Elena laughed. It came out watery and broken, but real. If you ever lie to me the way Duke did, I'll leave and never come back. Deal. And if you try to sell this ranch again without talking to me first, I won't, I promise. And you have to let me keep training Midnight. He's mine now. Yours and the ranch's. But yes. Caleb's hand was still on her face, his eyes searching hers. Are we doing this? Really doing this? Elena thought about all the reasons she should say no, all the ways this could go wrong, all the pain that might be waiting down the road. Then she thought about the way he'd held her in the storm, the way he'd defended her to Duke, the way he was looking at her right now like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for 5 years. Yes, she said, we're really doing this. Caleb kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. Elena kissed him back, tasting salt from tears she wasn't sure were his or hers. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach in Black Hollow, Elena felt like she'd finally come home. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know what happens now," he admitted. "I've never done this before. The second time around." "Neither have I. The first time around either, really. James Whitmore didn't count." "We'll figure it out together." "Together," Elena agreed. "But first you need to go deal with Harrison Webb. Pretty sure he's still waiting down there." Caleb groaned. "I forgot about Webb. Also, Duke stole from you and tried to frame me for losing midnight. We should probably figure out what to do about that." "We'll report it to the sheriff in Black Hollow. Let him handle tracking Duke down." Caleb's expression hardened. "I should have seen what he was doing. Should have noticed the signs. He was good at hiding it, and you trusted him. That's the problem. I trusted him more than I trusted my own judgment." Caleb looked at her. "I won't make that mistake again." They walked back down the hill together, not touching, but close enough that their shoulders brushed. Webb was standing by his wagon, looking impatient. "So?" he demanded. "Are we conducting business or not?" "Not," Caleb said. "This ranch stays in my family, but I appreciate the offer." Webb's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Boone. This place is too much for one man to handle, especially a man who can't keep his own foreman honest. Good thing I'm not planning to handle it alone anymore." Caleb glanced at Elena. "I'm promoting Miss Mercer to head horse trainer, and I'll be hiring a new foreman to replace Duke. Someone trustworthy this time." Webb followed Caleb's look, his expression turning sour. "You're putting a woman in charge of your horse program? That's your solution? That woman saved a horse your nephew said was worthless. Trained him from vicious to valuable in 3 months. So yes, that's exactly my solution." "This ranch will fall apart within a year," Webb predicted. "You'll come begging me to buy it then." "I guess we'll see." Caleb's voice was pleasant but firm. "Have a safe trip back to Black Hollow, Mr. Webb." Webb climbed into his wagon, muttering about fool ranchers and women who didn't know their place. Elena watched him go with a satisfaction that felt almost indecent. "Head horse trainer?" she said once Webb's wagon was out of earshot. "Unless you don't want the job." "I want it, but that's a big promotion. The men might—" "The men will adjust. Anyone who has a problem with it can work somewhere else." Caleb turned to face her fully. "You've earned this, Elena. Not because I'm in love with you, but because you're good at it. Better than anyone else I've got." Jack appeared from around the barn, Cody and Miguel with him. All three were grinning. "About damn time," Jack said. "We was wondering when you two would figure it out." Elena felt heat creep up her neck. "Were you all watching?" "Might have been," Cody admitted. "But in our defense, it was pretty obvious. The way the boss looked at you every time you worked with Midnight? Man was gone." "I wasn't that obvious," Caleb protested. "Boss, you were about as subtle as a horse with a broken leg," Miguel said. "We all knew." Even Carmen had appeared, wiping her hands on her apron, her face split in a smile. "Finally, I was starting to think I'd have to lock you two in the barn together." "Did everyone know except me?" Elena asked, looking around at the gathering crowd of ranch hands. "Pretty much," Jack said cheerfully. "But we figured you'd work it out eventually. Or kill each other trying. It was about 50-50 odds." Caleb shook his head, but he was smiling. Really smiling. The kind of smile that transformed his whole face and made him look younger, less burdened. "Get back to work, all of you. We still have a ranch to run." The men dispersed, still grinning. Carmen lingered long enough to squeeze Elena's hand and whisper, "Be patient with him, mija. He's worth it." Then she too was gone, leaving Elena and Caleb alone in the yard. "So," Elena said, "head horse trainer, that comes with a raise, right? Don't push your luck. I'm going to need better quarters too. That cabin's too small." Caleb's expression went serious. "Actually, I was thinking, there's plenty of room in the main house. If you wanted, eventually, not right away, but—" He stopped, looking flustered in a way that was almost endearing. "I'm not asking you to move in. Not yet. Just saying the option exists. When you're ready." Elena's heart did something complicated in her chest. "One step at a time," she said gently. "We've got time." "Yeah, time." Caleb looked relieved. "That's good. Time is good." They stood there for a moment, not quite sure what to do next. Then Midnight whinnied from his stall, a loud, demanding sound that clearly meant he was bored and wanted attention. "I should go work with him," Elena said. "I should check the north fence, and probably ride into town to talk to the sheriff about Duke." "Okay." Neither of them moved. "Elena?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for not giving up on me, on this place." She smiled. "Thank you for finally figuring out what everyone else already knew." This time when he kissed her, it was in full view of anyone who cared to look. And when they pulled apart, Elena could see ranch hands quickly pretending they hadn't been watching from various strategic locations around the property. "They're never going to let us live this down," Caleb muttered. "Probably not," Elena agreed. "But I think I'm okay with that." The rest of the day passed in a blur of work and stolen glances. Elena trained Midnight while Caleb rode into town. The stallion seemed to sense her good mood, responding to every cue with unusual enthusiasm. When she finally put him away for the evening, she stood in the barn doorway and looked out at the ranch. Her ranch now, in a way it hadn't been before. The sun was setting over the western hills, painting everything gold. Men were finishing their work, heading toward the cookhouse for dinner. Somewhere close by, Carmen was singing in Spanish. The air smelled like dust and horses and growing things. This was home. Messy, complicated, difficult home. But home nonetheless. Caleb found her there as the last light was fading. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her and looked out at the same view. His hand found hers in the darkness between them. "The sheriff's going to put out word about Duke. Probably won't find him, but at least it's official." "Good." "And I hired a new foreman, old friend of mine from when I first started ranching. Good man, fair. The crew will respect him." "Also good." They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Caleb said, "I went to the cemetery, after the sheriff's office. Told Sarah about you." Elena's breath caught. "What did you say?" "That I met someone who makes me want to live again, instead of just survive. That I think she'd like you, that I hope—" His voice cracked slightly. "I hope I'm not betraying her memory by being happy." "You're not," Elena said firmly. "Love isn't betrayal, it's the opposite. That's what I'm learning." He squeezed her hand. "Slowly, but learning." Carmen's voice rang out across the yard. "Dinner! Elena, Caleb, stop standing around like statues and come eat!" They walked to the cookhouse together, and when they entered, the whole crew was there. Someone had clearly told everyone what happened, because the welcome they received was loud and genuine. Men who'd barely spoken to Elena weeks ago were clapping her on the back. Jack made a toast with coffee cups since they didn't have anything stronger. Miguel kept grinning at her like she'd done something heroic. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. That night, lying in her too-small cabin, Elena thought about everything that had happened since she'd stepped off that stagecoach. She'd come here expecting to marry a stranger and build a life on compromises and practical arrangements. Instead, she'd found something infinitely more complicated and infinitely more real. She'd found work that mattered, friends who cared, a horse who trusted her, and a man who was learning to love again despite all the reasons he'd given himself not to. It wasn't the story she'd imagined when she left St. Louis. It was better, harder, messier, more uncertain, but better. Through the window, Elena could see the main house on the hill. A single light burned in the upstairs window, Caleb's room probably. She wondered if he was thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. If he was scared the way she was scared. If he was already second-guessing what they'd started. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A ranch to run, a horse to train, men to prove herself to all over again in her new role. Duke was still out there somewhere, probably angry and possibly dangerous. Winter would come eventually, bringing its own hardships. There were 1,000 ways this could still go wrong. But tonight, Elena let herself feel hopeful. Let herself believe that sometimes broken things could be mended. That sometimes the person you needed found you right when you'd given up looking. That sometimes love was worth the risk of loss. She closed her eyes and slept, dreaming of black horses and wide skies and a man who was finally learning to smile again. 3 weeks passed before Duke made his move, and when he did, it came in the worst possible way. Elena was in the training paddock with Midnight, working on advanced maneuvers. The stallion had progressed beyond her wildest expectations. He responded to the slightest pressure from her legs, turned on voice commands alone, and had developed a kind of partnership with her that went deeper than simple obedience. She'd started letting some of the other hands work with him too, teaching them the techniques she'd developed, and Midnight had accepted them with wary tolerance. Caleb watched from the fence sometimes, his presence a warm constant that still made Elena's heart skip, even after weeks of stolen kisses and quiet conversations. They were taking things slow, too slow for Carmen's liking, who kept making pointed comments about the empty rooms in the main house. But it felt right. They were both learning how to be with someone again, how to trust that happiness wouldn't be snatched away the moment you reached for constitutionship it. The new foreman, a steady man named Tom Garrett, had settled into his role with quiet competence. The crew respected him, and more importantly, he respected Elena's authority over the horse program. The ranch was running smoother than it had in years, which should have been Elena's first warning that something was about to go wrong. She was dismounting for Midnight when she heard it, a sharp crack like a gunshot, followed immediately by the stallion's scream of pain and terror. Midnight reared straight up, his eyes rolling white, and Elena barely managed to roll away before his hooves came crashing down where she'd been standing. The horse bolted, not toward the barn, but toward the open gate that someone had left unlatched. Elena scrambled to her feet, her heart in her throat, and saw the source of the sound. A firecracker, still smoking in the dirt near where Midnight had been standing. No, no, no! She ran after the horse, but he was already through the gate and heading for the open range, running blind with panic. Men were shouting, running for horses. Tom appeared at Elena's elbow, his face grim. Someone set that off deliberately. The gate was latched when I checked it 10 minutes ago. Duke, Elena said. It has to be Duke. I'll get a search party together. You stay here. Like hell I will. That's my horse. Elena was already running toward the barn. She grabbed a saddle, threw it on the nearest mount, a steady mare named Rosie, and was riding out before anyone could stop her. She heard Caleb shouting behind her, but she didn't slow down. Midnight was hurt and scared and running, and every second she wasted was a second he could break a leg in a ravine or get tangled in barbed wire or any of the 1,000 ways a panicked horse could die out here. The tracks were easy to follow at first, Midnight's hoofprints in the dust, heading west toward the rougher country. But as the ground got rockier, the trail became harder to read. Elena pushed Rosie as fast as she dared, her eyes scanning constantly for signs of the stallion. She'd been riding for maybe an hour when she heard it, a horse's scream, high and desperate, coming from somewhere to her left. Elena turned Rosie toward the sound and found herself at the edge of a shallow ravine, and there, at the bottom, was Midnight. He was tangled in old barbed wire, the kind that ranchers used to mark property lines decades ago and then abandoned when it got too rusted to maintain. The wire was wrapped around his legs, his chest, cutting into his flesh every time he moved. Blood streaked his black coat. His eyes were wild with pain and terror. Elena's stomach dropped. She dismounted and started picking her way down the ravine, moving as carefully as she could on the loose rock. "Easy, boy," she called softly. "I'm coming. Just hold still." But Midnight couldn't hold still. He was trapped in a nightmare, the wire cutting deeper with every thrash. If he kept fighting like this, he'd bleed out before she could free him. Elena was halfway down when she heard hoofbeats behind her. She turned and saw Caleb riding up fast, his face pale. "Don't move," he called down from her. "I'm coming with wire cutters." He dismounted and climbed down, more reckless than Elena had been, sliding the last few feet. When he reached her, he pressed the wire cutters into her hands. "Talk to him. Keep him calm while I cut." "Caleb, this is too dangerous. If he thrashes, then we both get hurt, but we're not leaving him." His eyes met hers, steady and sure. "We do this together." Elena nodded and moved toward Midnight's head. The horse's eye focused on her, and she saw recognition there beneath the panic. "Hey, beautiful," she murmured, placing her hands on his face. "I know it hurts. I know you're scared. But we're going to fix this. You just have to trust me one more time." Caleb was already working on the wire around Midnight's legs, cutting carefully, peeling away the barbed metal strand by strand. Each piece that came free revealed cuts, some shallow, some deep enough to worry about. The horse trembled but held still, his whole body rigid with the effort of not fighting. "Almost got it," Caleb muttered. "Just a few more." The sound of a gun cocking stopped them both cold. Elena looked up and felt her blood turn to ice. Duke Harlan stood at the top of the ravine, rifle pointed down at them. His clothes were dirty, his face unshaven, and there was something unhinged in his eyes that made Elena's skin crawl. "Thought you could get rid of me that easy," Duke called down. "Thought you could steal my job, turn the boss against me, and I'd just disappear?" "Duke," Caleb's voice was carefully calm. "Put the rifle down. This doesn't have to—" "Doesn't have to what? End badly?" Duke laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "It already ended badly, Boone. You chose her over me. A woman you barely know over 10 years of loyalty. So yeah, it's going to end badly. Question is how badly." Elena kept her hands on Midnight, but her mind was racing. They were trapped at the bottom of a ravine with an injured horse and a man with a gun. No cover. No way out except past Duke. "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "What do I want?" Duke's face twisted. "I want my life back. I want the respect I earned. I want you gone so things can go back to how they were." "Things were never going to stay how they were," Caleb said. "I was half dead, Duke. Running this ranch like I was going through the motions of a life I didn't want anymore. Elena didn't take anything from you. She just showed me I didn't have to live that way." "By playing the damsel? By batting her eyes and making you feel like a hero?" Duke spat in the dirt. "She's using you, boss. Can't you see that? She came here with nothing. Now she's got a fancy title and she's living in your pocket and probably planning how to take the whole ranch once you're too far gone to notice." "That's not true," Elena said. "Isn't it? You show up wearing a wedding dress for a man you never met, desperate enough to trap any fool who'd take you. Whitmore dies, so you set your sights higher. And Boone here, he's so lonely and broken, he fell for it." "Duke," Caleb started. "I'm done listening to you defend her." Duke's hand tightened on the rifle. "I gave this ranch everything, everything, and you threw me away like trash for some woman who'll be gone the second she finds a better option." Elena felt Midnight trembling under her hands. The horse was getting agitated again, sensing the tension. If he started thrashing now with the wire still partially tangled around him, he'd hurt himself worse. Maybe fatally. "I'm not leaving," Elena said, looking straight at Duke. "Whatever you think of me, whatever lies you've told yourself about why Caleb chose me, none of it matters. Because I'm staying. I love this ranch. I love this horse. And I love Caleb. You can point that gun at me all day and it won't change those facts. Then maybe I should just shoot you and solve everyone's problems." "You won't." That was Caleb, standing up slowly, putting himself between Elena and the rifle. "You want to shoot someone, Duke. Shoot me. I'm the one who failed you. I'm the one who didn't see what you were going through. But Elena's innocent in all this." "Innocent?" Duke's laugh was bitter. "She destroyed everything." "No, I did." Caleb's voice was steady, sad. "I destroyed it by being too broken to see that you needed something from me I couldn't give. I destroyed it by letting you think loyalty meant I owed you everything, even when you were stealing from me, even when you hit her." Duke's face went red. "I only hit her because—" "There's no because," Caleb cut him off. "You hit her because you were angry and you could, because you thought your position gave you that right. But it didn't. It never did." For a long moment, Duke just stood there, the rifle still pointed at Caleb's chest. Elena could see the war happening behind his eyes, rage and pain and something that looked like grief all fighting for control. Then, slowly the rifle lowered. "I hate you," Duke said, and his voice broke. "I hate both of you for making me into this. I was good at my job. I was respected. And now I'm nothing." "You made yourself into this," Caleb said quietly. "We all make choices, Duke. You chose to steal, chose to lie, chose to hurt people instead of dealing with your own pain. Those were your choices." Duke wiped his face with his sleeve. When he looked up again, the rage had drained out of him, leaving only exhaustion. "I can't come back from this, can I?" "No," Caleb said. "You can't." Duke nodded once, like he'd expected that answer. He set the rifle down carefully on the ground, then turned and walked away. They heard his horse, heard him riding off, and then there was only silence. Elena's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold on to Midnight. Caleb climbed back down and pulled her against his chest, and for a long moment they just stood there, holding each other, while their hearts remembered how to beat normally. "He could have killed us," Elena whispered, "but he didn't. He was hurting, and hurt people do terrible things, but somewhere under all that anger was still a man who knew right from wrong. Caleb pulled back to look at her face. We should go after him. Tell the sheriff. Later. Right now we need to finish freeing Midnight. They worked together, cutting away the last of the wire, cleaning Midnight's wounds as best they could with water from Caleb's canteen. The cuts weren't as bad as they'd looked, painful and ugly, but not deep enough to be life-threatening. The stallion stood perfectly still for the whole process, like he understood they were helping. When the last piece of wire was gone, Midnight took one shaky step, then another. He was limping, favoring his right front leg, but he was mobile. That was something. Think you can make it back to the ranch? Elena asked him, running her hand down his neck. The horse lowered his head and pressed his forehead against her shoulder. It was answer enough. The ride back was slow and careful. Midnight walked between Rosie and Caleb's mount, letting them guide him. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was setting and half the crew was out looking for them. Tom Garrett took one look at their faces and said, What happened? Duke happened, Caleb said. But it's over now. Get Doc Harrison out here to look at Midnight's legs. And someone ride to town, tell the sheriff Duke Harlan was here and made threats. He's armed and he's not thinking straight. The crew scattered to follow orders. Carmen appeared with blankets and hot coffee, fussing over Elena like a mother hen. But Elena barely noticed any of it. She was focused on Midnight, watching Doc Harrison examine each wound, holding her breath until the doctor straightened up. He'll be fine. Needs stitches on a couple of these, and he should rest that leg for a few weeks. But nothing's broken. He's a tough one. Elena felt tears threaten and blinked them back hard. Thank you. Thank you for getting him out of there. Another hour and infection would have set in bad. That night, after Midnight was stitched up and settled in his stall with extra hay and Carmen's special warm mash, Elena sat on the porch of the main house with Caleb. They hadn't talked much since getting back. There'd been too much to do, too many people needing answers. But now, in the quiet dark, Caleb reached for her hand. When I saw Duke with that rifle pointed at you, I thought, his voice cracked, I thought I was going to lose you the same way I lost Sarah, that I'd finally let myself love someone again, and the universe was going to punish me for it. But you didn't lose me. No, but I could have, and that's going to terrify me for a while. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting starlight. I don't know how to do this, Elena. How to love someone and not be consumed by the fear of losing them. You do it one day at a time, Elena said. You wake up and choose to be brave, to trust that today you get to keep what you love. And if tomorrow brings loss, then tomorrow brings loss. But you don't ruin today by living in fear of it. Is that what you do? It's what I'm trying to do. Elena squeezed his hand. I'm scared too, you know. Scared that you'll realize I'm not worth all this trouble. That I'm just a broke woman from St. Louis who doesn't know anything about ranching except what I've learned in 5 months. Scared that one day you'll wake up and miss Sarah so much you won't be able to look at me. That won't happen. You can't promise that. No, Caleb admitted, but I can promise that I'll try. That I'll keep choosing you, even on the days when it's hard. Even on the days when I'm scared or sad or convinced I'm messing everything up. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. You're worth trying for, Elena. You're worth everything. Elena felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of fear she'd been carrying since the day she arrived. Maybe since before that. Maybe since her parents died and she learned that love meant risk, and risk meant potential loss, and the only way to avoid loss was to avoid loving anything at all. Move in with me, Caleb said suddenly. Into the main house. I know we said we'd take it slow, but I don't want slow anymore. I want you in my life fully, not in pieces. I want to wake up and know you're there. I want to come home to you after a long day. I want... He stopped, took a breath. I want to marry you, eventually. When you're ready, if you're ready. Elena's heart was hammering. That's not slow. I know. We've only been together a few weeks. I know that too. Carmen's going to say she called it. Caleb laughed, and it was a sound of pure joy. She absolutely will. So what do you say? Elena looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who'd defended her when no one else would, who'd sat up all night with a sick horse because she asked him to, who'd put himself between her and a gun without hesitation, who was learning, day by difficult day, how to be alive again instead of just surviving. Yes, she said, to moving in, to building something real together, to eventually, when we're both ready, making it official. She paused. But I'm keeping my job, and midnight's still mine. Wouldn't have it any other way. This time when he kissed her, it felt like a promise, like a beginning instead of an ending, like two broken people deciding that maybe they could make something whole together. The next few months passed in a blur of change and growth. Elena moved her belongings, which still didn't amount to much, into the main house. At first it felt strange, living in rooms that had been Sarah's, sleeping in a bed another woman had shared with Caleb. But slowly, the house stopped feeling like a museum and started feeling like home. Elena added touches of her own, wildflowers in jars on the kitchen table, new curtains in the bedroom, her books on the shelves next to Caleb's. The crew adjusted to seeing them together. There were some jokes, some knowing looks, but mostly there was acceptance. Elena had proven herself too thoroughly for anyone to question her place on the ranch. Midnight healed completely from his wounds. The scars on his legs were visible but faded, and within 2 months he was back to full training. Elena started taking him out on the range, showing him that the world beyond the ranch wasn't something to fear. The stallion's transformation was complete, from wild and violent to trained and steady. Harrison Webb's nephew actually came back asking if the horse was for sale, but Caleb turned him down flat. "That horse isn't going anywhere," he told Webb. "He's family." Duke was caught 3 weeks after the incident, trying to cross into Colorado. The sheriff brought him back to stand trial for theft and assault, and a half-dozen other charges that ensured he'd be locked up for a good long while. Elena testified at the trial, standing in front of a courtroom and telling the truth about what he'd done. Duke never looked at her once during the whole proceeding. When the verdict came back guilty, he was led away in chains, and Elena felt something she hadn't expected: pity. Duke had let his pain and pride turn him into something ugly. He'd made choices that destroyed his life, and now he'd spend years paying for them. It was a waste, a preventable tragedy born from refusing to deal with his own wounds. Elena thought about that a lot in the months that followed, about how easy it was to let bitterness poison everything good, how fear could make you push away the very things that might save you, how pride could trap you in patterns that hurt everyone around you. She thought about it because she saw those same impulses in herself sometimes. The urge to protect herself by pulling away. The fear that happiness was temporary and would be snatched away at any moment. The old voices that said she wasn't good enough, wasn't worth keeping, would eventually be abandoned. But she was learning to fight those voices. Learning that trust was a choice you made every day, not a one-time decision. Learning that love was an act of courage, not a guarantee of safety. Caleb was learning too. He still had bad days when grief hit him sideways. Sarah's birthday, Ryder's birthday, the anniversary of their deaths. On those days, Elena gave him space but not distance. She let him feel what he needed to feel while showing him he wasn't alone in it anymore. "I don't know if this gets easier," he told her one night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, missing them. "It doesn't get easier. You just get stronger at carrying it." "How do you know?" "Because I watched my parents die from cholera when I was 19. Watched them waste away in a charity hospital while I worked 16-hour shifts trying to pay for medicine that didn't work. And for years afterward, I felt guilty every time I was happy. Like being happy meant I'd forgotten them." Elena rolled onto her side to look at him. "But I hadn't forgotten. I just learned that they'd want me to live, not just exist. That honoring them meant building a life they'd be proud of, not punishing myself forever for surviving when they didn't." Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness. "I think Sarah would have liked you." "Yeah?" "Yeah, she would have said you were too stubborn and too brave for your own good. Then she would have made you her best friend and probably conspired with you to keep me from being an idiot." Elena smiled. "I could have used a friend like that." "You've got Carmen." "True, though Carmen's conspiracies mostly involve trying to get me to cook more and work less." "Carmen's smart." They lay there in comfortable silence, and Elena thought about how different her life was from what she'd imagined when she left St. Louis. She'd expected to arrive in Texas and build a life on compromises, marrying a man she didn't love, doing work she didn't care about, making the best of a situation born from desperation. Instead, she'd found something real. Work that mattered. A horse who trusted her absolutely. a found family in Carmen and Miguel, and the ranch hands who'd gone from hostile strangers to loyal friends. And Caleb, complicated, damaged, brave Caleb, who was learning alongside her that survival wasn't the same as living. It wasn't a perfect life. They still argued sometimes, usually about Elena taking unnecessary risks or Caleb trying to protect her from things she didn't need protection from. The ranch had hard times, seasons when money was tight and the work was endless. Winter came and was brutal, testing everyone's endurance, but they weathered it together. 6 months after Duke's trial, on a cool spring morning with wildflowers blooming across the hills, Caleb and Elena stood in front of the ranch crew and were married. It wasn't a fancy ceremony, just a circuit judge from Black Hollow, a simple exchange of vows, and Carmen crying happy tears while pretending she had something in her eye. Elena wore the cream-colored dress she'd arrived in, the one meant for James Whitmore. She'd considered getting a new dress, something without the weight of that failed plan attached to it, but Carmen had talked her out of it. "That dress brought you here," Carmen said, "brought you to this ranch, to Caleb, to the life you were supposed to have all along. Don't throw it away. Honor what it represents, that sometimes the things that look like endings are really beginnings in disguise." So Elena wore the dress, and when Caleb saw her in it, his eyes went bright with emotion. He took her hands and spoke his vows in a voice that shook slightly but never wavered. "I promise to love you through the scared times and the brave times. Through the days when grief hits me sideways and the days when I forget anything was ever wrong. I promise to trust you with my broken places and believe you when you say I'm worth keeping. I promise to choose you every morning and mean it every night. And I promise that you'll never have to face the hard things alone, because we're in this together now, for as long as we both breathe." Elena's vows were simpler but no less true. "I promise to stay, even when it's hard, even when you push me away because you're scared, even when I'm scared too. I promise to love the ranch and the horse and the life we're building with everything I have. And I promise to remind you every day if I have to that you deserve to be happy, that we both do." When the judge pronounced them married, Caleb kissed her like it was the first time and the last time and every time in between. The crew cheered. Carmen sobbed. Miguel set off fireworks that scared every horse on the property and made Midnight scream indignantly from his stall. That night there was a celebration in the cookhouse. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing, awkward, enthusiastic dancing that involved a lot of stomping and laughing. Jack got drunk and made a long rambling toast about how he'd known they'd end up together from the start, which was a bald-faced lie, but nobody called him on it. Tom Garrett presented them with a hand-carved picture frame he'd made himself. Even old Webb's face softened when he shook Caleb's hand and said, "You picked a good one, Boone. Don't mess it up." But the best moment came later, after the celebration wound down and most of the crew had stumbled off to their bunks. Elena slipped away to check on Midnight one last time, because some habits were too ingrained to break even on your wedding night. The stallion was dozing in his stall, one hip cocked, completely relaxed. When Elena approached, his ear flicked toward her, but he didn't open his eyes. "Hey, beautiful," she said softly. "Just wanted to say goodnight." Caleb appeared beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. Together they stood in the quiet barn, watching the horse who'd started everything. "You saved him," Caleb said. "We saved him. Together." "No. You saved him first. I just helped." Caleb turned her to face him. "You know what I realized today? During the ceremony?" "What?" "That you saved me too. I was just like Midnight when you got here, wild and scared and fighting everything because I thought if I let my guard down I'd get hurt again. And you looked at me the same way you looked at him, like I was worth the patience, worth the risk." Elena felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "You were worth it, are worth it. So are you." He kissed her forehead. "Come on, it's late, and I want to start our first night as a married couple before it turns into morning." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Elena looked up at the stars scattered across the black Texas sky. She thought about the girl who'd stepped off a stagecoach 5 months ago, broke, scared, desperate. That girl wouldn't recognize her life now, wouldn't believe that the scared horse could be saved, that the grieving rancher could learn to love again, that a mail-order bride nobody wanted could become the heart of an entire ranch. But maybe that was the point. Maybe transformation wasn't about becoming someone completely different. Maybe it was about finding the place where you fit, the people who saw you clearly, the work that made you feel alive. Maybe it was about learning that broken things didn't need to stay broken. That fear was real but didn't have to be permanent. That love was always a risk, but some risks were worth everything. Inside the house, Caleb pulled her close, and they stood in the kitchen where Carmen had fed her that first night, where she'd sat across from him and fought about everything and nothing, where they'd slowly learned to be real with each other. "Happy?" he asked. Elena thought about that question, about all the ways she could answer it, about the complexity of happiness that included grief and fear and uncertainty alongside the joy. "Yes," she said finally. "Scared sometimes, sad sometimes, but happy. Really, truly happy." "Me too." They went upstairs together, and through the bedroom window Elena could see the barn where Midnight stood guard over his domain, could see the hills rolling away into darkness, could see the whole ranch spread out below them, their ranch now, their home, their life. The frontier was still harsh. Winter would still come. There would be hard seasons and difficult choices and days when everything felt impossible. But they'd face it together, her and Caleb and the black stallion, who'd taught them both that wild things could heal if someone cared enough to be patient. Elena had come to Texas looking for safety and found something infinitely better. She'd found purpose, found family, found love that was messy and real and brave enough to exist in the face of loss. She'd found home. And in the end, that was the only transformation that mattered. Not becoming someone perfect or fearless or unbroken, just becoming someone who'd learned to stay, to trust, to love without guarantees, to build a life on hope instead of desperation. The cream-colored wedding dress hung in the closet, a reminder of where she'd started. But tomorrow she'd wake up in work clothes, ready to train horses and run a ranch and live the life she'd fought so hard to claim. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Caleb pulled her close, and Elena closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to believe what she'd been afraid to hope for all along. That she was home, that she was loved, that she was enough, and that sometimes the best stories were the ones that started with endings and transformed into beginnings that lasted a lifetime.